Chapter 560. Everyone turned to look at the lavish horse-drawn carriage, as well as the beautiful woman in a red dress standing on the shaft of the carriage, and they were all quite surprised to see her. Half a dragon coin and half a gold coin. That's the symbol of the Buffett family. Hill Buffett. She's the true leader of the Buffett family. Who would have thought that she would be here, and she wants to become a judge? I didn't wait an hour for nothing. The judges for today's competition are truly invincible. Soon, someone identified the horse-drawn carriage and the beautiful woman in the red dress, and they were all quite surprised, but also a little expectant. Meg was also looking at Hill with a hint of surprise in his eyes. This legendary woman in Chaos City's business circle was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Her fiery red lips and wavy brown hair made her look more mature than her actual age. Standing on the shaft of the carriage, the aura of a strong woman in the workplace was unmistakable. She didn't look like a 17 or 18-year-old girl at all, but the slender legs exposed under the red dress made it impossible to ignore that she was a stunner that men couldn't take their eyes off. All right, then the final judge will be this beautiful young mistress. Meg nodded with a smile. He had a big business deal that he wanted to discuss with this woman who controlled the Buffett family's treasury, so this was clearly a good opportunity to get to know her. You're a very discerning man. An alluring smile appeared on Hill's face as she gracefully stepped down from the horse-drawn carriage and made her way through the crowd. Thank you for your hard work, MIA, Meg said with a nod as he looked at Yarbemia, who was laying out the smokeless charcoal on the grill. It wasn't hard at all. Let me bring out the tables and chairs for the judges. Yarbemia shook her head before making her way over to the tables and chairs. There are so many men standing here, they'll do a good job. Meg shook his head with a smile before turning to Ricky's employees. Bring those 3 tables over here, and put them together in a row, then bring 5 chairs over here. Ricky waved his hand, and the employees quickly walked over. A judging panel made up of 3 tables appeared in front of the grill. Robert sat in the middle, with the Hill and Febid on either side of him. The 5 judges took their seats, and everyone looked at Meg and Ricky expectantly, waiting for the duel to officially begin. Compared to Ricky's complicated grill, the long grill in front of Meg was very simple. There were a few small steel bars on the grill, and it was a little confusing as to how Meg was going to use it. Do you still need to continue preparing? Ricky asked as he looked at Meg. Aside from the grill in front of Meg, there was also a table filled with all kinds of condiments. There was also a black square box at the center of the table, and no one knew what was inside. From the looks of it, he had no intention of blocking anyone's view at all. The time is exactly 1 hour. Let's start the duel. Meg raised his hand and looked at his watch. The pointer pointed to 6 o'clock. All right, let's begin then. A serious look appeared on Ricky's face. He turned around and waved his hand. 2 muscular employees carried out the black mountain goat that they had brought over, and began to slaughter it. That's a first-tier magical beast, black hopping goat, someone in the crowd exclaimed. Black hopping goats aren't easy to catch. Even if they're farmed, they're quite expensive. Its taste and texture are even more delicious than normal mountain goats. I didn't think that Mr. Ricky would use it for today's grill. I wonder what kind of ingredient Mr. Meg will use, someone exclaimed in surprise. Everyone turned to look at Meg. Robert and the others nodded at the black mountain goat. Black hopping goats weren't considered high-grade ingredients, but there weren't many species of mountain goats in the first place, and the easiest to obtain was the hopping goat. It was clearly a very good choice for Ricky to use a black mountain goat for his grill. Ricky also turned to Meg with a smug look on his face. He had come prepared, and this black hopping goat had been prepared in advance. In contrast, Meg was in such a hurry that he probably didn't even have a decent piece of meat to offer. Meg glanced at the black goat that was still struggling under the pressure of the 2 burly men, and opened the black box in front of him unhurriedly. Cold air rose slowly, and a piece of beef brain appeared in the middle of the box. Meg had pulled this piece of beef brow out of the fridge. The system had just granted him the right to use ingredients, and the beef provided by the system was of a higher quality than the beef from the ironhide bull that he had slaughtered himself. Furthermore, it was clearly a lot fresher, so he didn't hesitate to use it. He placed the beef onto the chopping board. The fresh beef was riddled with snowflake-like patterns, and the texture of the meat was extremely delicate. This is... Febid's eyes widened with incredulity at the sight of the beef on the chopping board. This is beef from a 4th-tier magical beast, Ironhide Bull, and it's so freshly preserved, as if it had just been slaughtered. Who would have thought that this shop owner would be able to get his hands on Ironhide Bull beef? Even mercenary groups don't dare to mess with Ironhide Bull beef. Unless there's a high bounty on it, it's very rare to be able to purchase it. The white-bearded professor was also quite surprised. How? How is this possible? Ricky's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he was suddenly struck by a sense of panic. He had thought that Meg wouldn't be prepared in such a hurry, but he had just pulled out a 4th-tier magical beast ingredient. It looks like there really is someone who came prepared. This shop owner really is quite interesting. A hint of curiosity appeared on Hill's face as he appraised Meg through narrowed eyes. A stir also ran through the crowd upon hearing this. 4th-tier magical beasts weren't something that everyone could afford, let alone such a rare Ironhide Bull. In comparison, Ricky's black hopping mountain goat didn't even seem to be worth mentioning. Ingredients are only the icing on the cake. The most important factor in determining the flavor of the roast meat is the chef's skill. There's not even a drop of oil on the grill, and he hasn't even lit a fire yet. He probably doesn't even know how to roast the meat, so how is he going to beat me? Ricky thought to himself as he regained his confidence. He picked up his knife and began to skin the goat himself, striving to ensure that every step of the process was perfect. Meg also wore an earnest expression as he pulled his Chinese cleaver from the knife rack. The tip of the cleaver slid gracefully over the beef, and when he withdrew the cleaver, the entire piece of beef had already been sliced into 2-centimeter wide cubes. The cuts were very smooth, and it was as if the size of each cube had been measured with a ruler. Chapter 561. After the black hopping goat was slaughtered, Ricky carried the cleaned goat into the barbecue area, which was blocked by wooden planks. The employees of Ricky's rotisserie all retreated to the side. This was a showdown between the two of them. Dense waves of heat rose up from behind the wooden planks, and it was clear that Ricky had already begun his barbecue. Everyone's eyes also turned to Meg. He didn't block the barbecue grill, but he sprinkled some unknown condiments on the sliced beef before rubbing it together. At this moment, he was seriously mixing some condiments into a bunch of bottles. What's the owner of Mammoth doing? Why hasn't he started his barbecue yet? Yeah, it looks like he's mixing something. But does barbecue require a lot of condiments? Wasting so much time on this doesn't seem like a wise choice, does it? You guys don't understand. Mr. Mac is a genius, and he was born to revolutionize everything. Everything that doesn't make sense is reasonable when applied to him. Otherwise, how could he make so much delicious food? Look at his serious and meticulous expression. This step must be very important. As time passed, the aroma of barbecue began to waft from Ricky's area, but Meg was still mixing the condiments. Everyone couldn't help but scratch their heads in confusion. However, most of the regular customers of Mammoth were still full of confidence, and were almost fanatical in their praise of Meg's cooking. He seems to be mixing the sauce, but isn't the texture the most important thing about barbecue? All of the condiments can only be used as support. The lighter the flavor, the better. Only then can the original flavor of the barbecue be maximized. Charles frowned as he looked at Meg. As an experienced barbecue chef with over 20 years of experience, he had a deep understanding of the art of barbecue. However, he couldn't understand what Meg was doing. Wasting so much time in such an important showdown clearly wasn't a wise choice. In a showdown, chefs would generally do their best to finish their dishes as soon as possible. This was because a dish that was served late could have its rating lowered due to the judges having already tasted the dish. If the taste of the dish wasn't outstanding enough, it would often lose out. Meg had cut the meat into small cubes, which were easier to cook than Ricky's whole roasted lamb. However, he hadn't even started a fire yet. Instead, he had wasted a lot of time on seasoning, which was rather foolish in a duel. I hope this guy won't waste a high-grade ingredient like the Ironhide barbarian beef. Otherwise, I'm going to have to give him a harsh scolding for wasting ingredients, Febid thought to himself as he looked at Meg. Remove the board. Half an hour later, Ricky's voice sounded from within the wooden planks, and the employees of Ricky's rotisserie rushed forward to remove the wooden planks around the grill, revealing the massive black grill within. Ricky was sweating profusely as he stood in front of a semi-enclosed oven. He spun the roasted goat, which was already beginning to glow with a golden yellow color, and a rich aroma wafted through the air as the partition was removed. It smells so good. I feel like I can eat an entire roasted lamb just from the taste of this roasted meat. All of the onlookers' eyes lit up as they were attracted by the rich aroma wafting through the air. That fatty Ricky's cooking skills seemed to have improved. Also, this oven is quite interesting. It's only been half an hour, but the roasted lamb is already giving off such a fragrant aroma. In another half an hour, the lamb should be ready. Febid looked at Ricky with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He then turned to the still motionless Meg, and he couldn't help but shake his head. Had that guy already given up? A smug smile appeared on Ricky's face upon hearing the chatter of the onlookers. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a towel before turning to Meg to check on his progress. He faltered slightly upon seeing that Meg had only just put down his spoon, and the grill hadn't even been lit yet. A mocking smile then appeared on Ricky's face. It appeared that this guy's calmness was nothing more than a bluff. Perhaps he didn't even know how to cook roasted meat. There was no suspense in this match anymore. A faint smile also appeared on Meg's face as he put down his third bowl of sauce. Even though this was a challenge match, he still had a plan in mind. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to launch a new product launch to showcase his 3 flavors of roasted beef kebabs. Meg raised an eyebrow at the sight of the smug smile on Ricky's face and the cumbersome grill. He had spent a lot of time concocting the sauce, so it looked like he had to hurry up. Meg pulled out a bamboo skewer that was around 30 centimeters in length from the basket beside him, and began to skewer the marinated beef onto the skewer. There were 3 pieces of beef on each skewer, and they were set aside around 2 centimeters apart. Soon, there was a pile of meat skewers on the plate. What's Mr. Mac doing? Why is he skewering the beef? Is he trying to create a new way of cooking roasted meat? Yeah, this is the first time I've seen roasted meat like this. Do you think it'll taste good? Only 3 pieces per skewer. That's a little stingy. I'm looking forward to the whole roasted lamb. The aroma is getting stronger and stronger. I'm going to try it at Ricky's rotisserie tomorrow. There's not much time left for Mr. Mac. Will he be able to finish at around the same time as Ricky? If he takes too long, it'll be very disadvantageous for him. Everyone was looking at Meg with curiosity in their eyes. His method of roasting meat was completely different from what they were used to, and some of them were starting to become concerned. Father is going to win for sure. Amy sat down on the stool she had brought over with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and spoke with full confidence. Please, boss, you have to win. Yarbemia was clenching her fists with a nervous expression. Amy, throw a small fireball over here and turn the charcoal red for me. Meg waved at Amy after skewering the meat. Starting a charcoal fire was a very time-consuming process, so Meg decided to take a shortcut. After all, it wouldn't be good to be too slow, and it would be very awkward if all of the judges were full. All right. Amy nodded before tossing a small fireball into the grill, and the black charcoal instantly turned a fiery red. Come back. Meg snapped his fingers, and Amy withdrew her hand. The flames were instantly extinguished, and the smokeless charcoal in the grill was burned to its peak condition, and there was even a hint of pine smoke wafting through the air. Chapter 562. Faint golden sunlight shone down upon the oily roast goat, giving it a golden sheen. The rich aroma of roast meat wafted through the air in all directions, and all of the spectators' eyes lit up in unison. They stood on their tiptoes, craned their necks, and stared at the roast goat with wide eyes as they swallowed involuntarily. It smells so good. This is the first time I've heard of such a delicious roast goat in the Aden Square. This aroma is comparable to that of Cardiff's roast pig. I feel like I've missed out on such delicious and cheap food in the past. Looks like I won't be able to eat it today, but I'm definitely going to try it at Ricky's rotisserie tomorrow. The problem is that Boss Ricky has already finished roasting the goat, while Boss Meg has only just started roasting the meat. How are they going to compete? I feel like the judges will be full from roast lamb. A commotion immediately erupted among the spectators. Some of them had already decided that they were going to try it the next day, while others were expressing concern for Meg, who had only just placed the kebabs on the grill. Could it really be Mr. Mac's first time roasting meat? He doesn't look very practiced, and he took so long to prepare the ingredients. Harrison was looking at Meg with a concerned expression, and his confidence was beginning to waver. All of the regular customers of Immerse also gradually fell silent. Both parties had invested their entire restaurant and all of their recipes into this contest. If Meg were to lose, then Immerse would cease to exist in Chaos City. They didn't believe that Ricky would be able to cook the same amazing dishes as Immerse. Faster! Faster! Yarbemia clasped her hands tightly together in front of her chest as she looked on with an urgent expression at Meg, who was still flipping the kebabs in an unhurried manner. She hadn't seen the grill in the kitchen before, and it was very likely that this was a new grill that Meg had just invented for his new dish. However, he was using it to compete with the experienced Ricky, so even though she had full confidence in Meg, she still couldn't help but feel nervous. Roast meat. Roast meat. Amy wasn't nervous in the slightest. She was staring intently at the kebabs on the grill with Ugly Duckling, and both of them swallowed their saliva in unison. Is he overconfident or overly conceited? I really can't see through him. She looked at Mag, who was still completely focused on flipping the skewers of meat. He didn't seem to have been affected by Ricky at all, and he didn't even take a single glance in Ricky's direction. The roasted lamb that Fatty Ricky made today seems a little different from before. Could it be that he made some improvements? Febid's Immerse roast meat, and Ricky's Immerse roast meat, and Amy's, Ansan's, Essence's and Mammy. I didn't think that so many people would attend today's competition. This improved roast lamb is going to give Ricky's rotisserie a new lease on life. Even without the Aiden Square Food competition, business will still flourish. Ricky looked at Mag, and his smile became even more vibrant and confident as he listened to the praises being heaped upon him. He took a sharp knife from the knife rack at the side. The tip of the knife pierced through the golden and crispy sheepskin, cutting off 5 lamb ribs and placing them on a plate. Then, he cut off 5 pieces of mutton from the hind leg and placed them on the plate. He signaled the waiter at the side to bring them over. The 5 plates of roast meat were placed in front of the 5 judges, and everyone's attention was drawn to them. The entire restaurant gradually fell silent. All of the people who had gathered here for such a long time were foodies. Even if they couldn't taste the roast meat, watching these professionals eat and listening to their comments would serve as an important reference for deciding whether or not the roast meat was worth tasting. These roast lamb ribs are golden in color, and they're extremely fragrant. There's nothing to criticize about their cooking skills, and they're definitely of the highest quality among all roast lambs. Charles nodded at the sight of the roast lamb ribs on his plate. Even though his restaurant mainly served roast beef, he was also a chef who made a living by roasting meat, so he was well aware of the culinary skills required to cook a roast lamb of this caliber. Without several decades of experience, there was no way one could cook a roast lamb of this caliber. A faint smile appeared on Ricky's face. The acknowledgement from a fellow chef was very valuable. The professor cut off a piece of lamb rib and took a bite, upon which his eyes immediately lit up. After chewing carefully, he exclaimed, The crispy skin of this roast lamb rib is overflowing with a fragrant aroma, and it immediately melts in my mouth. The unique flavor of roast lamb is completely irresistible. What's even more incredible is the sauce. It's slightly different from the one I've had at Ricky's rotisserie. It's fragrant, but not greasy. Not only does it not destroy the roast lamb's natural flavor, but it also enhances the texture and flavor of the roast lamb. After swallowing, the roast lamb still lingers in my mouth. The sound of saliva being swallowed immediately rang out in the crowd. As expected of a food critic who was renowned for his salivating reviews, the professor's comments were truly worthy of his reputation. Ricky's smile became even more vibrant. It seemed like he had already secured 2 votes. Ricky's rotisserie has been around for 3 generations, and each generation has hung their own name on the signboard as if they're afraid that others won't know which fatty owns the restaurant. However, what I didn't expect was that the roast lamb that hadn't changed in several decades would be improved by Ricky today. Even though it's only a slight change in the sauce, such an insignificant change in the Barclay family's rotisserie, which is known for its cowardice, almost made my teeth fall out of my mouth in shock. The roast lamb rib tastes pretty good. Febid nodded as he tasted a piece of lamb rib. Ricky's face darkened. If he hadn't heard Febid's last sentence, he would have most likely flipped out on the spot. As expected, this guy was so annoying even when he said something nice. However, it looked like Febid's vote was already in the bag. Even Febid, who's known for his strictness, praised this lamb rib. It looks like this lamb rib really is quite good. Yeah, I'm drooling just from looking at it. 3 of the judges have already expressed their approval. If the remaining 2 judges also think it's delicious, I feel like the owner of Amy's is going to be done for. The spectators gradually became restless. The scales of victory seemed to have tipped in Ricky's favor, and all of them turned to look at Hill in unison. Hill sliced off a piece of leg meat with a small knife, then gracefully speared it with a fork as he prepared to put it into his mouth. SSSS tilde tilde tilde. Right at this moment, a subtle sound rang out, and it was as if a delicious bomb had been detonated. A strong aroma spread in all directions from the rotisserie in front of Meg, and it was as if there was some sort of magical power that instantly entered everyone's nostrils. It smells so good. Is this the aroma of roast meat? It's incredible. The crowd immediately became restless. This aroma was even more enticing than Ricky's roast lamb, and just the aroma alone was enough to make everyone salivate. Everyone's eyes quickly fell on Meg, who was gracefully brushing the sauce on the meat with a brush, as well as the roast beef kebabs sizzling on the rotisserie. Chapter 563. The rich aroma was like a deep water bomb, jolting everyone awake from their fantasies of Ricky's roasted lamb before dragging them into an even more delicious abyss. What a peculiar aroma! The aroma of the fresh ironhide bull beef has been brought to the extreme, and what's even more peculiar is the aroma of the roast meat. It's like a mixture of all types of spices, but it's so harmonious, elevating the aroma of the roast meat to a whole new level. I've never seen roast beef with such a rich aroma. Could it be that he spent so much time mixing the sauces? Febid's eyes widened with incredulity as he stared at the roast beef kebab in Meg's hand. Beef was his favorite food, especially an ingredient like ironhide bull beef that was extremely rare. It wasn't even on the Duca's restaurant's menu, and only VIPs could make reservations in advance. As a result, he was basically blacklisted, so he naturally couldn't eat it. However, the roast beef kebab in Mag's hand had completely piqued his interest. In fact, he had even forgotten about his own persona, and had blurted out his insults without even bothering to mock Mag. It's also roast meat, so why is its aroma so prominent? Even though ironhide bull beef is a high-grade ingredient, its aroma is mainly reflected in its texture. As such, the sauces that he's applying should be the most important thing. The sauces that he spent the most time mixing during the entire cooking process are the finishing touches, and they've completely upended my impression of roast meat. The professor was also full of genuine praise. He had been a little skeptical as to why Meg had spent so much time mixing sauces, but it appeared that the time was well worth it. As expected, Mr. Mac was born to revolutionize everything. It's truly a blessing that a chef like him has appeared in the Aden Square. I'm sure it won't be long before the food in the Aden Square reaches a new level. Robert, who had remained silent this entire time, nodded as he looked at Meg with a faint smile on his face. If I were in his shoes, I would have already lost to this aroma. Charles took a deep breath of the rich roast meat aroma wafting through the air, and he couldn't help but heave a faint sigh. No one was more aware of the disparity between them than he was. Miss Hill, you've given up on tasting the roast lamb chop. You're so straightforward. Febid didn't even say a single word of mockery. He was praising the dish the entire time. Could it be that his first non-poisonous food review is about to be published? Hill gave up on tasting Ricky's roast mutton for the time being. The judges' comments and the delicious aroma wafting through the air had completely ignited the atmosphere. Everyone looked up at the roast beef kebab in Meg's hands. This man was using a completely subversive roast meat method to make them smell the most fragrant roast meat. Boss, you're amazing. Yarbemia stared at Meg with a look of reverence on her face. She had been a little worried before, but after smelling that rich aroma, all of her worries had completely transformed into reverence. Only Meg was capable of making such delicious kebabs, and he had spent so much time on the sauce, which was a testament to his dedication to perfection. It really is even more fragrant than the one I had at noon. Father really didn't lie to me. Roast meat, roast meat. I really want to eat it. Amy craned her little head to look at the kebab on the roast rack with anticipation in her eyes. Ugly Duckling also craned its neck as if it were preparing to pounce on the kebab. Ricky had thought that victory was already in his grasp, but his expression had darkened. He had been given the cold shoulder by Hill, and the 3 judges who had supported him had all switched sides and given him extremely high reviews. And that was only because of the aroma wafting through the air. This guy must have put something indescribable into the roast meat. Otherwise, how could the roast meat emit such an aroma? Ricky was starting to get a little frustrated. His confidence had been completely shattered. Even though the aroma didn't represent the flavor, he still felt a massive threat. Judging from the way Meg was brushing the sauce onto the kebab, he didn't appear to be a roast meat novice at all. All of the information that he had gathered was completely wrong. He had bet everything he had on this day, and had most likely fallen into a trap that he had dug for himself. All of the employees of Ricky's rotisserie who had been brimming with confidence were now wearing nervous expressions. If Ricky lost, they would most likely lose their jobs, and that was not good news for them. No way. It's definitely just a slightly more fragrant aroma. The most important thing when it comes to roast meat is the control of the heat and the flavor of the roast meat itself. Just because there's a lot of spices doesn't necessarily mean that it's delicious, Ricky said in an attempt to instill some confidence in himself and his employees. Meanwhile, Meg still wore a calm and collected expression as he focused intently on the kebab in his hand. He picked up a second brush and began to brush the sauce onto the second kebab. He was very pleased with the aroma of the sauce. It was clearly more aromatic than the simplified version that he had used in the afternoon, and all 3 flavors of the sauce had been very successful. Meg brushed the sauce onto all of the kebabs on the roasting rack before flipping them over a few times to allow the sauce to completely seep into the beef cubes. He then placed 2 kebabs onto each of the 5 plates that he had prepared in advance, leaving 3 in his hand. He turned to Yarbemia with a smile, and said, "Mia, bring them to the judges." "All right." Mia nodded. She picked up the plate and walked over to the judges. Meanwhile, Mag passed 2 of the beef kebabs to Amy, and put the last kebab into the small fish bowl that Ugly Duckling ran over to get. He left a few kebabs for his daughter and her cat. "I'm so envious of such a good father. I want to be a cat in his house." Everyone turned to look at Yarbemia as she made her way over to the judges' table, and many of them turned to look at Amy and Ugly Duckling. The first ones to taste the kebabs weren't the 5 judges. Instead, it was these 2 adorable little ones. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling let out an elated cry before lowering its head to bite onto a kebab. It shook its little head before biting off half of the kebab before chewing joyfully. Its little eyes had narrowed into slits, and it seemed to be in a very good mood. "Thank you, Father." Amy held a kebab in each hand. The 3 cubes of beef were slightly different in color, and the snowflake-like fatty meat looked like transparent crystals embedded into the beef after being cooked, creating an intricate and beautiful sight. Amy sniffed at the kebab first, and her bright blue eyes lit up. She opened her little mouth and bit onto half of the kebab before chewing joyfully. Her little head swayed left and right with an elated expression on her little face. After swallowing, she stuck out her little pink tongue to lick the sauce from her lips, and a sweet smile appeared on her face. Gulp tilde tilde the sound of saliva being swallowed rang out in an extremely loud manner. Does she have to be so tempting? I feel like the owner is cheating. I can't take it anymore. I feel like I'm going to melt from her cuteness. I suddenly want a daughter. That smile is so adorable. Here's the kebab. I want to steal the owner's daughter away. Chapter 564. The judges hadn't even started commenting yet, but the onlookers were already in an uproar because of the way Amy ate the kebabs. If there was one thing that represented cuteness, then Amy was the only one that came to mind right now. Moreover, The fragrant kebabs were incomparably delicious in her mouth. Her sweet and adorable smile coupled with her blissful eating posture made it seem like nothing could be more blissful than eating the kebabs in her hands. This should be the new dish that Mr. Mac is preparing after coming back from his trip to collect ingredients, right? As expected, Mr. Mac always brings us surprises every time he goes out to collect ingredients. I must be the first to taste this delicious kebabs tomorrow. I wonder if Mr. Mac will open for business tonight. After watching the little boss eat the kebabs, I don't think I can make it through this long night. That's impossible. Mr. Mac is a very principled person. If he says he'll take a day off, then he'll take a day off. You don't have to think about it tonight. All of Mammy Restaurant's regulars were completely at ease now, and were in a very good mood. Most of them were looking forward to seeing when this new dish would appear on Mammy Restaurant's menu, and their anticipation had been raised to an extreme. As for those who had heard of Amy's for the first time, they were also starting to have some interest in the restaurant. The little girl was really enjoying her food. However, they still wanted to hear the judges' comments and see who would emerge victorious in today's competition. 5 plates of kebabs were placed in front of the 5 judges. Yarbemia returned to Meg's side, and Meg whispered a few words into her ear. Yarbemia was slightly taken aback, but she quickly nodded and turned to walk into the restaurant. Meanwhile, Meg was appraising the judges with a smile, silently waiting for their comments and choices. He was still feeling a little strange. After all, this was the first time that he had placed his cooking on a table for professionals to evaluate, and 2 of them were from the same industry as him. Ricky's expression was also quite grave. His hands were tightly clenched behind his back, and cold sweat was slowly flowing down his forehead. If he had known that Meg was this good at roast meat, then he definitely wouldn't have challenged him. Even if it was just to garner popularity for Ricky's rotisserie, he would have at least removed the last 2 conditions. If he were to lose the recipe and the restaurant, then he would have lost everything. Currently, a plate of roast lamb and a plate of freshly pulled kebabs were placed in front of the 5 judges. 3 of the judges had already tasted the roast lamb and gave it good reviews, but Mr. Hill and Mr. Robert had yet to taste it. Mr. Robert sliced off a piece of lamb rib and a piece of lamb leg, and he nodded as he said, "This roast lamb rib is crispy and fragrant, and the sauce and condiments are just right. The control of the heat is perfect, and this is one of the best roast lamb ribs ever. The roast lamb leg is tender and juicy, and it has a very smooth texture, bringing out the delicious flavor of the lamb to perfection. In a whole roasted lamb, roasting different parts of the lamb to the best degree of heat and taste, this whole roasted lamb is undoubtedly very successful." Mr. Hill took a glance at Mr. Robert, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he picked up his fork again and placed a piece of lamb leg into his mouth. After chewing for a while, a faint smile appeared on his face, and he nodded as he said, "This roast lamb leg really is quite good. The skin is charred and the meat is tender, and it's even more delicious than Cardass roast lamb. Of course, their master's dish is the roast suckling pig." Ricky and his employees' expressions eased slightly upon hearing this. At the very least, they had received good reviews from the 5 judges. However, none of the judges had tasted Meg's kebabs yet, so they didn't know how they would fare. "Let me try this roast beef skewered on bamboo skewers first." Mr. Febid was just about to cut into the kebabs when he caught sight of Amy, who was happily munching on a kebab with one hand. He hesitated momentarily before setting down his knife and fork, and he picked up a kebab instead. The aroma of roast meat wafted toward him, and the translucent fatty meat was embedded into the beef like a series of small crystals. The sauce had been applied in an extremely smooth and even manner, and the surface of the roast meat had a faint sheen of oil, giving it a very delicate appearance. However, the 3 pieces of beef were slightly different in color, and Mr. Febid was rather perplexed by this. He didn't know whether it was a mistake in applying the sauce, or a lack of control over the heat. On the surface, this was clearly a negative factor. To be able to roast 3 pieces of beef of different colors on the same kebab, it would be a pity not to dye them. Mr. Febid pursed his lips as he looked up at Meg. Even though the kebabs smelled very good, he couldn't pass up on an opportunity to use his venomous tongue. He had to maintain his own style, and he couldn't afford to ruin his image. Febid's words also caused a burst of laughter. People who liked to read Febid's food reviews didn't want to get any recommendations from him. More often than not, they wanted to see him use sharp and vicious words to review restaurants and food. His witty words often made people smile. Controlling the heat is the most basic ability of roast meat. Ricky looked at the different kebabs in Mr. Febid's hands, and a hint of mockery appeared on his face. No matter how fragrant the kebabs were, if they couldn't even control the heat properly, then Meg's roast meat would only be a failure. Everyone's expressions became even more expectant upon hearing this. The color wasn't important. The most important thing was whether or not the kebabs tasted good. Now, the outcome of the kebabs had become something that everyone was looking forward to. Meg smiled, but didn't say anything. The reason why the kebabs were of different colors wasn't because of the heat, but the food would speak for itself, so he didn't bother to explain. Mr. Febid was already prepared to retaliate, and he was rather disappointed to see Meg remain silent. The aroma of the kebabs in his hands wafted into his nostrils, and the most prominent one was the aroma of garlic. He had never seen anyone add garlic as a condiment to roast beef, and he couldn't imagine what the combination of the two flavors would be like. As a result, his anticipation for the kebabs plummeted even further, and he was no longer as excited as he had been when he first smelled the kebabs. Let's at least give it a try. Hopefully, he won't ruin such a supreme-grade piece of ironhide bull meat, Mr. Febid thought to himself before taking a bite of the topmost piece of beef. This flavor. It's incredible. Mr. Febid's expression immediately lit up. As soon as the beef entered his mouth, the slightly charred skin and the garlic-scented sauce melted in his mouth. The aroma of garlic, which was normally quite pungent, was now extremely gentle and delicious, and he couldn't help but salivate. Then, he chewed it carefully. The fresh and tender beef melted in his mouth, and the aroma of garlic and meat spread out from the meat. The delicious taste bloomed in his mouth instantly. With every bite, he could feel his taste buds cheering, making it impossible for him to stop. Chapter 565. I can't believe Febid used the word delicious to describe this beef kebab. This is incredible to him, who normally only uses not bad to describe his favorite food. Most importantly, aren't the two beef kebabs of different flavors? It's already very impressive to be able to create one type of delicious roast beef, but this restaurant owner created two types of delicious roast beef in the same kebab. This is incredible. There are 3 types of beef kebabs. Have you forgotten that all 3 of them are of different colors? It's clearly not because they're undercooked, it's because the 3 kebabs have completely different flavors. Febid's words created a stir among the crowd, and everyone wore astonished expressions, as well as a hint of excitement. It shouldn't disappoint me, right? Hill looked at the intricate roast beef kebab in front of her before slicing off half a piece of beef with a knife. Juices flowed out of the incision, and she could feel the softness of the meat beneath the knife, but it didn't stick to the knife in the slightest. The delectable aroma of meat wafted forth, and her eyes immediately lit up. In her eyes, ironhide bulls were only ordinary ingredients, and higher-level magic beasts were nothing more than 3 meals a day for her. However, this small piece of beef had given her such a strong reaction to food for the first time. There seemed to be a voice in her head that was yelling in a frenzy, "Eat it! Eat it!" Hill picked up a piece of beef with her fork before gracefully placing it into her seductive mouth. Her elegant brows immediately perked up, and her expression also lit up. The delicious sauce on the surface of the beef and the juices flowing out of the incision instantly awakened her taste buds. She chewed lightly, and the juices and condiments in her mouth created an incredible combination of deliciousness. It was as if a thunderbolt fireball had exploded in her mouth before transforming into countless thunderbolt fireballs. The more Hill chewed, the more the aroma exploded. She couldn't help but chew faster and faster. Then, it became an interesting cycle that she couldn't stop. Even when she swallowed the meat into her stomach, the unforgettable aroma still lingered between her lips and teeth. Hill didn't say anything. Instead, she reached out and grabbed the kebab on the plate. She took a bite of the remaining half of the kebab, closed her eyes, and chewed carefully. A blissful and satisfied smile appeared on her face, and it was as if all of her ladylike demeanor was no longer worth maintaining in the face of such delicious food. What an incredible taste! "This is the most delicious food I've ever eaten. Even the roast pig from Carper's restaurant isn't half as delicious as this." After finishing a piece of beef, Hill exclaimed in admiration. He raised his hand and took another bite. This time, the taste of garlic was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a mellow taste of sauce. The taste was slightly heavier. After swallowing, the rich aroma still lingered in his mouth. Then, it attacked the third piece of beef. Miss Hill actually gave such a high evaluation. "Earlier, I said that Ricky's roast lamb is better than Duca's restaurant's roast lamb, but that's just an ordinary dish from Duca's restaurant. Roast suckling pig is Duca's restaurant's signature dish, and it's ranked first on the gourmet cuisine rankings." Gulp, "I can't take this anymore. I'm starving to death. Why am I being tortured here when I haven't eaten anything yet?" It's over. All 5 of the judges are completely immersed in the kebab. Ricky's roast meat is going to go cold. Another uproar immediately ensued after Miss Hill's evaluation. Her evaluation had completely exceeded everyone's expectations. Duca's restaurant's roast pig was extremely renowned, and one had to make a reservation 15 days in advance before being able to eat it. Furthermore, the price was exorbitant, and it was not something that the average person could afford. However, the roast pig was the epitome of all high-end restaurants in the Aden Square, yet it had now become nothing more than a foil to Ricky's roast beef kebab. Furthermore, Miss Hill of the Buffett family had just given her evaluation. Ricky's face had paled slightly, and his hands were trembling slightly behind his back as he forced himself to remain calm. Meanwhile, the employees of Ricky's rotisserie were already in a state of complete panic. They clenched their fists nervously with dejected expressions on their faces. They could already sense that a shadow was slowly descending upon them, but there was no way for them to escape from this shadow. Robert had already taken a bite of his third beef kebab, and as soon as it entered his mouth, a hint of elation appeared on his face. The invasively spicy flavor was like a series of tiny fireballs exploding on his taste buds. It was as if a bucket of oil had been poured over a scorching fire, instantly igniting his taste buds. After tasting the delicious garlic and sauce-flavored roast beef, Robert actually wasn't looking forward to the third beef kebab. After all, no matter how delicious a dish was, it would lose its allure after tasting it 3 times. However, this beef kebab had completely upended his expectations. The invigorating spiciness was only the beginning. After igniting his taste buds, the aroma hidden behind the spicy flavor began to reveal its unique allure. In contrast to the unbearable spiciness of normal chili peppers, the spiciness contained within this beef kebab wasn't unbearable. Instead, what was even more pronounced was the aroma that began to emerge from the beef kebab. His taste buds had already been stimulated by the first 2 beef kebab, and in that instant, the aroma was brought to a peak. The scorching spiciness flowed down his throat, and his entire stomach seemed to have warmed up. It was so comfortable that he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. "These 3 beef kebab have brought me 3 types of pleasant surprises. The garlic-flavored beef is delicious and refreshing, the sauce-flavored beef is rich and fragrant, and the spicer-flavored beef is extremely spicy. Each of the 3 kebab flavors is very unique. They're all roast beef kebab, but they're all completely different experiences, and each of them is an extreme culinary experience." Robert put down the skewer in his hand, and sighed with emotion. His gaze fell upon Meg, and there was a hint of gratification and admiration in his eyes. A person like him could only be described as a genius. He'd created a completely revolutionary roast beef kebab, yet he'd presented an impeccable answer sheet. Furthermore, the order in which he'd chosen the 3 kebab was also a display of his wisdom. If he'd placed the spicy kebab first, then the other 2 kebab flavors would have definitely been overshadowed. Phew, the other 4 judges put down the skewers in their hands almost in unison, and all of them heaved sighs of contentment. Hill stuck out her tongue in an adorable manner, and it was quite rare for her to be so adorable. However, she quickly covered her mouth with her hand. "I don't even know what words I can use to describe this delicacy. I've never been touched by this delicious kebab before in my life. Once I get home and calm down, I'll be sure to reflect on this feeling and share it with everyone," the professor said with a slightly wistful sigh. "I'm ashamed of myself, Charles said with a hint of defeat on his face. The entire venue fell completely silent. There seemed to be no suspense in the outcome, but everyone still wanted to hear the final result from the judges. Chapter 566. Everyone was staring at the 5 judges with wide eyes, waiting for them to announce the final result. Ricky's breathing began to accelerate. He could already tell from the 5 judges' comments that they were biased toward, but he was still hoping for a miracle. He had spent 3 years researching and developing that sauce, and had experienced countless failures, all for the sake of improving the flavor of Ricky's roast meat. How much courage and wisdom was required to accomplish such a feat? He couldn't lose. That was a business that had been run by 3 generations of the Barkley family. If he were to lose, then he would have no face left to continue living. Amy was elated as she prepared her second kebab, and she wasn't worried about the outcome of the competition in the slightest. After all, in her eyes, no one could be more powerful than her father, so she was sure that he would win this competition. I choose the roast beef kebab made by the owner of Amy's. Hill wiped the corners of her mouth gracefully with a silk handkerchief before turning to Meg with a smile. The beef is very delicious. If there's a chance, I'd like to invite you to the Buffett Manor to cook another delicious roast beef kebab for me. Thank you for your invitation, Ms. Hill. It would be an honor for me to be able to visit the Buffett Manor, but if you'd like to try my roast beef kebab, then I'd like to invite Ms. Hill to my restaurant for a taste. Meg turned down Hill's invitation with a smile. Meg wasn't someone who would do things like providing on-site service. Even if Hill were to offer him a high price, he still wouldn't agree. On top of that, he had a big business deal that he wanted to discuss with her. If he were to roast beef kebab for her, then he would appear to be in a disadvantageous position, and that was a huge taboo in business negotiations. Hill looked at Meg with a hint of surprise in her eyes. This was the first time that a chef had turned down her invitation. If all of the chefs who wanted to work at the Buffett Manor were to find out about this, they would most likely beat their chests in frustration. What an interesting guy. She nodded, and said, "All right, looks like Mr. Meg is someone who can distinguish between work and personal life very well. If you have some time on your day off this week, perhaps you could bring your adorable daughter to the Buffett Manor for a visit." "My pleasure." Meg nodded slightly, but he didn't show too much surprise. It was as if he had just accepted an invitation from an ordinary friend. He had been to many rich manors in his previous life. If he really wanted to count, his house could be considered as one as well, so he didn't feel that this was something to be happy about. Everyone looked at Meg enviously. If the Hills' initial invitation was to invite Meg to the manor to cook for her alone, and after being rejected by Meg without hesitation, her second invitation was as if she was inviting him as an equal friend. To be treated like this by the young leader of the Buffett family, Meg really was quite impressive. The Buffett Manor wasn't a place that just anyone could enter and leave. As one of the wealthiest families on the entire Norland continent, even the slightest bit of money that slipped through their fingers was enough to drive anyone crazy. Ricky's face turned a shade paler, and he resisted the urge to speak. "Is there any suspense to this question? This roast beef kebab has completely overturned all of my expectations of roast meat. Such delicious roast meat has never appeared on the Norland continent, and it most likely won't appear in the future, either. As such, I choose the roast beef kebab." Febid spoke in a loud voice, and a complex expression appeared on his face. He had completely overturned all of his expectations today, but even as picky as he was, he really couldn't find any fault with such a perfect roast beef kebab. If he really wanted to find fault with it, then the only thing he could think of was that there were only 3 cubes of beef on the kebab. There simply wasn't enough. Ricky's expression changed again, and he turned to the remaining 3 judges with a pale face. The employees of Ricky's rotisserie were also in a complete panic. Was the worst thing that they wanted to happen going to happen? What were they supposed to do now? All of the spectators were also looking at the remaining 3 judges. As long as one of them voted for Meg, then Meg would win this contest. Flavor, texture, heat control. Mr. Mac's roast beef kebab is superior in all aspects. It's both delicious and innovative, so I choose the roast beef kebab. Robert turned to Ricky with a forlorn expression. If it weren't for the fact that Ricky's rotisserie had rigged the votes on the Aden Square Food competition rankings, his roast lamb would have made it into the top 30 for sure. Boss Ricky's roast lamb has indeed improved significantly, but Boss Meg's roast beef is undoubtedly perfect, so I choose the roast beef kebab. The professor pointed at Meg with a forlorn expression. I choose the roast beef kebab. Charles heaved a forlorn sigh as he turned to Ricky, and a sense of empathy welled up in his heart. If Duca's restaurant's roast pig was an insurmountable peak for all of the rotisserie restaurants in the Aden Square, then Mammoth's roast beef kebab would most likely surpass Duca's restaurant's roast beef kebab, and all of the rotisserie restaurants in the Aden Square had lost their motivation to catch up. Mammoth's has won with a unanimous vote, someone in the silent crowd exclaimed, and a massive commotion instantly ensued. Even though this result was within everyone's expectations, they were still very excited to see Meg's roast beef kebab in front of them. They had thought that Ricky would be able to crush Meg in a landslide victory, but Meg had turned the tables on Ricky with a perfect roast beef kebab and received a unanimous vote. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. The result was within his expectations, but he was still quite happy to receive a unanimous vote and an extremely high evaluation. Th. Impossible. Ricky's rotund body swayed unsteadily, and he looked as if he were about to fall to the ground at any moment. His face had turned as pale as a sheet of paper. None of the 5 judges supported him, and if he lost like this, then his rotisserie would no longer belong to him. Now that the 5 judges have made their decisions, I win. Meg looked at Ricky with a calm expression, and there was no hint of elation on his face. No. I refuse to believe that this is the result. These people must have been hired by you. Ricky shook his head before rushing over to the judges' table. He grabbed the untouched roast beef kebab from Febid's plate before taking a bite out of it. This flavor. How is this possible? Ricky's eyes immediately widened as the delicious sauce and beef wreaked havoc in his mouth. The roast beef had been cooked with just the right amount of heat, and the roast beef had been cooked with just the right amount of heat. All of the energy in Ricky's body seemed to have been sucked out of him in that instant, and his legs gave out from under him as he sat down onto the ground with a forlorn expression on his face, as if he had lost his soul. Febid had already risen to his feet, and he quickly picked up the roast beef kebab that had slipped out of his hand. He looked at the missing piece of beef with a pained expression as he yelled, "Ricky, you've already lost. Why did you have to steal my kebab?" Chapter 567. How could this be? How could anyone in this world make such delicious roast meat? No. I can't lose. The Barclay family's rotisserie has been around for over 10 generations, ever since Rodu, and 3 generations in Chaos City. I can't let it fall into someone else's hands. Why am I so stupid? I've lost both the rotisserie and the recipe. My dad is going to be furious. I still want to show him that I'm in the top 20 on the chef's rankings board before he dies. Ricky collapsed onto the ground, and his clothes were completely drenched in cold sweat. Even the stone tiles on the ground were soaked, and his body was trembling as he cried, making him appear rather pitiful to the onlookers. The commotion in the crowd gradually subsided. Even though the match had already concluded, no one was in a hurry to leave. Meg and Ricky had placed a huge bet on this match, and everyone wanted to see how Meg was going to deal with the situation. Ricky was crying quite pitifully, but the regulars of Mammoth weren't concerned in the slightest. From morning until night, Ricky had been yelling at Mr. Mac for not daring to accept the challenge, and that he was the one who had proposed all of the conditions, so it was an extremely ugly sight to behold. Now that Mag had stepped in and won this battle where they had bet their dignity and all their assets, it could be said that Mag had helped them vent their anger. Of course, they weren't staying just to see Ricky's downfall. Most of them were here for the mutton kebabs on the table beside the rotisserie. They wondered if Mr. Mac would be in a good mood after accepting the challenge, and cook some beef kebabs for everyone. Everyone was extremely tempted by the sight of Amy and the other judges eating the mutton kebabs. Meanwhile, Meg was looking at the message displayed in his mind, and a peculiar expression appeared on his face. The system had suddenly issued a new mission, and this mission was so embarrassing that he didn't know what to say. As such, he pursed his lips internally as he cursed, "System, This new mission of yours is toxic. Are you trying to draw hatred toward me? I still want to continue to develop in a wretched manner. Can't you just let me be a handsome man who cooks in peace? Host, as a candidate for the god of cookery, you should challenge the world with your culinary skills and conquer the world with your delicious food. This system expresses serious disdain towards your idea of being content with seclusion, developing wretchedly, and becoming a Voldemort. Therefore, in order to speed up your culinary skills, this mission was selected. The system's solemn voice sounded, with a hint of unquestionable authority. I'm a father now. As long as my baby is outstanding, it's fine. Why should I be so high profile? What if others think that I'm the main character? Meg said indifferently. This system is already very outstanding, and I've always known that I'm a main character, so you don't have to worry about this. The system snorted. Meg raised an eyebrow and said with a strange expression, I'm talking about Amy. System, do you have to act so naturally? Meg's mind was suddenly filled with chaotic noises, followed by a row of garbled codes. After a while, the system's voice sounded out, gnashing its teeth as it said, Host, please complete the mission within 3 minutes. If you fail the mission, you will be punished by forfeiting 0.75 points of physical strength. Holy fuck. Do you have to be so ruthless? Meg couldn't help but curse. If this were to happen, then all of his hard work today would have been for nothing. He tried asking, then what's the reward for this mission? 1/2 of a point of physical strength, the system replied. Why didn't you say so earlier? Meg's eyes lit up. With this 0.25 point of physical strength, he would receive 1 point of physical strength for the day. He didn't think that he would be able to rise up 2 levels in a row. The system was being so generous today that it didn't seem like a proper system at all. The outcome of the duel has been determined, and I've won. The results were determined by the 5 judges, and everyone here can be witnesses. I'll send the agreement that we signed to the City Lord's Manor's notary office in a moment, and I'll ask the City Lord's Manor to assist with the handover of the restaurant. I hope that everything in the restaurant will be intact. As for the first 2 conditions, forget about it. Meg looked at Ricky with a calm expression. It was a basic trait of a businessman to not give up on profits for the sake of someone else's tears, especially when this was someone who had once tried to eat him alive. Boss Meg, I'll kowtow to you and call you father. Please don't take my rotisserie away from me. I know I was wrong, and I won't do it again. I'll be your son from now on, and I'll do anything you ask of me. Please don't take away my rotisserie, I beg you. Ricky's entire body trembled as he knelt onto the ground. He sobbed as he reached out to hug Meg's leg. I told you that I don't want Amy to have a strange little brother, so I won't agree to your request. Meg took a step back as a hint of disgust flashed through his eyes. He looked at Ricky with a cold expression, and said, I don't want your whole rotisserie lamb recipe. If you still have the basic dignity of a chef, then leave this place on your feet. No chef will starve to death in this world. Ricky's expression faltered upon hearing this. He looked up at Meg from his kneeling position, and something seemed to be gathering in his eyes. Of course, even if you go back and cook a whole rotisserie lamb for another 100 years, it still won't taste as good as mine. Meg looked down at Ricky, then looked around at everyone present with a smile, and said, I'm here to correct the definition of food in this world. If you're not convinced, then you're welcome to battle me. However, make sure to bring something that can tempt me. Wow. Mr. Mac is so cool. He's a little arrogant, but why do I feel like he's so cool? This is a declaration of war against all chefs in the world. I feel like there will be more and more battles like this in the future. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Meg, and it was as if there was a brilliant light radiating from this man's body, making it difficult for everyone to look away. Correct the definition of food. What a grand dream. I hope you can really achieve it. A gratified smile appeared on Robert's face as he looked at Meg. A person like him isn't easy to control. However, the Buffett family specializes in cooperation. It's not easy to be a great person, and it's also not easy to be a great chef. The Buffett family loves to help those who are struggling. The Hill also had a smile on his face as he looked at Meg with approval in his eyes. He had earned a restaurant in such a short time. Not only was he a chef, but he was also a shrewd businessman. The light that had just appeared in Ricky's eyes was instantly snuffed out, and he was helped into a horse-drawn carriage by a few employees. He quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a few employees who were waiting for the oven to cool down. They didn't know if there was a need to take the oven back. Following the conclusion of the duel, the judges couldn't help but pick up the remaining kebabs on their plates. How could they let such delicious food go to waste? Febid rolled his eyes at Ricky's carriage and grumbled to himself before continuing to eat the remaining 2 kebabs. Chapter 568. What's that? It looks like some kind of alcohol. It has the aroma of malt. Could it be malt wine? But how can malt wine be so clear and transparent? Everyone opened up a path and looked curiously at the tray in Yabemia's hands. In the large crystal glass, the pale golden liquid took up about 2/3 of the volume. There was a layer of white foam floating on top of it, and there were a few ice cubes floating in the middle. The faint aroma of malt wine wafted out, and the eyes of the people standing close to it lit up. Unlike the bitter taste of ordinary malt wine, this aroma was very refreshing, like the smell of the summer sea breeze. We won. Meg looked at Yabemia with a smile. Seeing the surprised smile on her face, he pointed in the direction of the judges and said, "Serve the beer to the judges." "Okay." Yabemia nodded happily, unable to hide the smile on her face. She was called by Meg to serve the so-called beer at the most critical moment, and she didn't expect to receive such good news as soon as she came out. Meg won, and Mamis wouldn't become someone else's restaurant, and she could continue to work at the restaurant. Yabemia placed the 5 glasses of beer in front of the 5 judges one by one, then took the tray and retreated to the side. The 5 judges had just finished their roast beef kebabs, and the spicy taste wreaked havoc in their mouths. They couldn't help but take deep breaths as they looked at the strange-colored beer in front of them, and couldn't help but look at Meg strangely. Meg took 2 steps forward and smiled at the 5 judges, saying, "This is beer with ice cubes, and it's also the restaurant's first beverage other than the roast beef kebabs. Since the judges have already eaten the roast beef kebabs, perhaps you can try this cold beer." "Beer? What kind of beer is this? How come I've never heard of it?" "Yeah, adding ice cubes in beer will dilute the taste of the beer, right? People who know how to drink won't spoil good beer like this." After Mr. Mack corrected the definition of good food, is he going to correct the definition of good beer in this world? Isn't this a little too cruel? Everyone started to discuss among themselves as they looked curiously at the pale golden beer. The judges' gazes fell back on the beer in front of them. The round crystal glasses were clean and transparent. It was hard to imagine that someone would use such a delicate and transparent crystal to make beer glasses, and there were 5 of the same style at once. It was so extravagant that they were speechless. There isn't even a single pattern, it feels like a waste of a good crystal. Hill took a glance at the crystal glasses, and her gaze was quickly attracted by the beer in the glass. The pale golden beer was clear and transparent, and there were no floating particles. Aside from the aroma of malt, there was also a peculiar aroma wafting toward her nose. It was an elegant and shy aroma that wasn't pungent at all. Instead, it was faintly discernible. It wasn't the aroma of malt, nor was it the aroma of flowers. It wasn't invasive, but it entangled one's heart. It was as if you had discovered a kitten in the bushes by the roadside, and it was trembling as it poked its head out to meow at you. However, when you tried to hug it, it would burrow back into the bushes. When you tried to leave, it would do the same thing and meow again, as if it were playing hide-and-seek with you. This was the aroma that made you want to smile. Hill didn't like to drink. Even if she did, she would only drink the top-grade wine brewed by her own winery. The Roth Empire's royal family would order a batch of wine from the Buffett winery every year for the emperor to enjoy, so she naturally drank better wine than that batch. However, she was suddenly quite interested in this glass of beer, which seemed to be malt wine. She had never seen a wine with so many bubbles before. It was as if there were snow piled on top of the glass, and there were 3 ice cubes floating in the beer, creating a rather peculiar sight. After a moment of hesitation, Hill picked up the glass and took a sip. The clear, pale golden beer slid down her throat, and the refreshing and smooth texture made her eyes light up. It was refreshing, but not lacking in richness. It was as if ice water had melted from a 10,000-year-old snowy mountain, and it was as if it had transformed into a stream of white water that flowed down from the top of a 10,000-year-old snowy mountain. The refreshing coolness instantly extinguished the burning sensation in her throat that had been caused by the spicy beef. She almost thought she heard a light sizzling sound, and it was as if her soul had been lifted into the air. There was a hint of bitterness in the beer, but it was still very pleasant. After swallowing, there was no aftertaste. Instead, it made her want to take another big sip. Phew, Hill exhaled gently, and stuck out her pink tongue to lick the white bubbles on her red lips. She carefully savored the faint aroma that lingered in her mouth. The alcohol wasn't overpowering, nor was it overly sweet. It gave her the impression that it was more delicious than the red wine that had been stored in the cellar of a winery for over 100 years. She raised the glass and took another big sip. A wisp of pale golden beer slowly slid down the corner of her lips, and then slowly flowed down her proud neck. Countless men couldn't help but salivate at the sight of her slightly moving throat. Febid raised his glass and tilted his head back to gulp it down. The beer in the glass was decreasing at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. The large glass that could hold a liter of beer was emptied in a single gulp. The crystal glass was placed on the table, and only the 3 ice cubes at the bottom and the white bubbles hanging from the sides of the glass were left. Burp. Febid let loose a long burp, and he didn't notice that his perfectly trimmed mustache was stained with bubbles. He exclaimed in an elated manner, "This beer is so refreshing. It's like it was made for roast meat. It's cold and smooth, and it's slightly bitter, but not astringent. The alcohol is gentle and harmonious, and it's extremely potent. The spiciness of the kebabs has been completely dispelled in just one glass, and it makes me want to have another big glass and another handful of kebab. This is indeed a very special wine. Even though it has the aroma of malt, it's not as bitter as normal wheat wines. The delicate bitterness makes the wine even more charming, and there's no aftertaste, so I can drink it continuously without stopping." The professor also quickly finished an entire glass of beer, and praised with a sigh of admiration. "This is indeed a very good beer. I've never drunk before, but even I find it to be very refreshing and delicious. It's not as hard to swallow as normal wines, and after drinking it, I feel as if my entire body has been cleansed. It's very special." Robert nodded in agreement before taking another small sip from his glass. "Good beer. If you can pair this with roast meat, it'll definitely be an extraordinary experience." Sile also nodded in agreement. He looked at Meg with a half-joking expression, and asked, "I wonder if you're thinking of selling this beer, Boss Meg?" "I'm not thinking of doing that at the moment. The production of hand-brewed beer is most likely not enough for the customers of Amy's." Meg shook his head with a smile. With these judges' words, his worries about the beer being unable to acclimatize to the environment in this world had been completely dispelled. "I'm getting thirsty from watching this. Is this so-called beer really that good? Look, young Mistress Hill is still drinking it. The Buffett Winery is one of the top 10 wineries on the Norland continent. If even she likes this beer, then it's definitely going to be good." Chapter 569. Ding. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission of declaring war on all the chefs in the world. The reward of 0.5 strength has been issued. You have accumulated 1 strength point. Would the host like to use it now? The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "I refuse." Meg didn't even think about it. He didn't want to experience the thrill of being electrocuted in public. With so many people watching, he might be treated as a lunatic and killed on the spot. That wasn't worth it. By the time the duel ended, the number of onlookers had reached close to 2,000. This was undoubtedly an excellent advertisement for Mammoth. It also increased the restaurant's exposure outside of the Aden Square food rankings. "Boss, give me 10 more kebabs and a beer," Febid said loudly. He couldn't take his eyes off the kebabs beside the grill. "If it's possible, I'd also like 2 kebabs and a glass of beer." Hill looked at Meg with a smile. She would control her intake for every meal, but today, she wanted to break this rule. Only good food could not disappoint her. "I don't mind trying the delicious kebabs and beer," the professor said with a smile. "Mr. Mack, why don't you open for business tonight as well? You can sell kebabs and beer. Let us have a taste. We can only look but not eat, but we're craving it." Harrison shouted in the crowd, which immediately caused a commotion. The onlookers' eyes lit up. Such delicious kebabs, even if the price was a little expensive, were worth a try. Moreover, there were so many people here. If the boss knew how to do business, he definitely wouldn't reject their requests. If he opened for business, it would definitely attract many customers. Meg looked at the pairs of expectant eyes and shook his head with a smile. "Sorry, the remaining kebabs are for our own dinner. We won't be selling them to the public. If the judges still want to eat, you can come back tomorrow when the restaurant is open for business. Everyone can also come back during business hours." He actually rejected Miss Hill and Febid's request. "I'm so disappointed. Why did I come here to suffer this kind of torture? Sigh, it seems that I have to come early tomorrow morning to line up. I can already foresee a long line at the entrance of the restaurant tomorrow. Alright, even Miss Hill can't eat beef kebabs, so I feel a lot better even if I can't. Let's wait for tomorrow then." Hearing Meg's words, the crowd was in a state of shock. Many people were surprised that Meg had once again rejected the Hills' offer. Moreover, it was only 2 kebabs. "Alright, then I'll have to wait until I'm free to eat this delicious roast beef kebab." A hint of surprise flashed through Hill's eyes. This was the first man who had rejected her twice in a row. However, she did not show any displeasure on her face. She stood up and looked at Meg with a smile. "Thank you for your hospitality. I look forward to Mr. Meg correcting more definitions of delicacies. I think that will be a wonderful thing." "I think that will be the case." Meg also nodded in response. He took a glance at the departing figure, then withdrew his gaze and expressed his gratitude to Robert and the others. Without any further discussion, he rejected Febid's request for another glass of beer. "Mr. Mack, you've obtained a new restaurant. Are you planning to move Amy's there or open a new branch? If I recall correctly, Ricky's rotisserie is several times larger than Amy's." Harrison squeezed his way through the crowd to the front with a curious look on his face. Many people who were preparing to leave also turned to look at Meg with curiosity in their eyes. Amy's was indeed too small, and it was quite possible that they wouldn't even be able to get a seat if they wanted to eat such delicious food in the future. "Well, I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that restaurant yet, but Amy's won't be moving, at least not in the near future." Meg shook his head with a smile. "Alright, then let's hope that Amy's can open a new branch as soon as possible. That way, we won't have to wait so long in line." Harrison nodded in response. Meg merely smiled in response. He really hadn't decided what he was going to do with Ricky's rotisserie yet. "Everyone, please disperse for now. Amy's will be releasing 3 flavors of roast beef kebabs and beer tomorrow. Each kebab will have 5 beef cubes, and you're all welcome to try them," Meg announced loudly with a smile. "There's 5 cubes. Boss Meg is so generous. We'll be here first thing in the morning, Mr. Mack. You can't just not serve them in the morning like you did with the roast fish. I'm leaving, I have to find a restaurant to fill my stomach. I'm so hungry that I'm about to collapse." Meg's words created another stir among the onlookers, and they began to disperse. The lawn in front of the restaurant had been trampled, and it was a complete mess. "Father is so awesome." Amy looked up at Meg with reverence in her eyes. She then pouted as she said, "But baby still wants to eat roast meat." Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling also let out a cry as it rubbed its head against Meg's foot. "Alright, father will make it for you too." Meg felt as if his heart were about to melt at the sight of the 2 little ones. He turned to Yarbemia, who was tidying up the cups, and said, "Mia, put the table back where it was, then wait for dinner with Amy." "Alright." A sweet smile appeared on Yarbemia's face. She was also very curious as to just what kind of delicious roast beef kebabs were that even someone as prestigious as young Mistress Hill couldn't resist the urge to order 2 more. "This guy is so stingy. He's going too far. Febid turned to look at Meg with an enraged expression as he stomped his foot. However, he couldn't help but heave a forlorn sigh as his gaze fell on the roast rack in front of him. He walked over with a conflicted expression as he murmured to himself, "But how can there be such delicious roast beef in this world? It completely satisfies all of my fantasies about roast beef. In fact, it has far exceeded my imagination. If I hadn't tasted it myself, I wouldn't have believed that there would be someone in this world who could make such delicious food. Even though this guy's mouth is almost half as good as mine, the problem now is, how should I write this article? I can't find any fault with it at all." The crowd dispersed, and Amy's returned to silence. The sky had already turned completely dark, and a full moon hung high in the sky. 4 Western-style street lamps were lit up, and the warm light illuminated the entrance of the restaurant. Yarbemia and Amy sat at a nearby table, resting their chins on their hands as they looked at Meg with anticipation in their eyes. The aroma of roast beef wafted through the air, and it was extremely enticing. Chapter 570. Come to think of it, it's been 3 years since I last came to Chaos City. I wonder if Alex is doing well with that little girl. Outside Chaos City, a fleet of carriages slowly approached. A young man lifted the curtains of his carriage and looked up at the 4 large characters on the city wall with a concerned look on his face. Under the moonlight, only an ordinary face could be seen. If it weren't for the scar at the corner of his eye, he would have been completely unrecognizable in a crowd. This guy is too stubborn, he refuses to accept a single cent. Even if he has a place to stay in Chaos City, he's definitely not doing well. I'll go visit him after I finish my business tomorrow. It's been 3 years, those people should have given up by now. The curtains of the carriage were slowly drawn down, and a voice that only he could hear sounded from within the carriage. The carriage passed the inspection, and continued onward toward the city. Further away, a knight in a black robe was also slowly making his way toward Chaos City, at the entrance of Amy's Mid-Autumn celebration. Amy and Yarbemia both turned to Meg with surprise etched on their faces. "Oh, father, are you going to make mooncakes with the moon for Amy?" Amy quickly came to her senses, and turned to Meg with an expectant look in her eyes. "That's right. I'm going to make mooncakes for everyone tomorrow." Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at the confused Yarbemia, and gave her a brief explanation of the Mid-Autumn Festival, as well as the significance of the celebration. "So it's a festival from your hometown, boss, and it has such an important meaning behind it. Reunion really is a wonderful thing." Yarbemia's eyes lit up, but they quickly dimmed, and she forced a smile onto her face. Meg looked at Yarbemia with a warm expression, and said, "I want everyone to be able to experience the sweetness of reunion, and I also want those who can't be reunited to be able to experience the warmth of reunion." "Thank you, boss." Yarbemia looked into Meg's eyes, and nodded with gratitude. "All right, have a taste of my delicious roast beef kebabs." Meg placed all the kebabs in his hands onto a plate, and placed it on the table. The kebabs of 3 flavors were stacked in 3 small piles, and there was no need for him to eat all 3 flavors for himself. "Boss, do you need me to get you a beer?" Mia looked at Meg and asked. Those people seemed to like to drink the malt beer with a special aroma. "We've won a restaurant today, so it's worth having a drink to celebrate." "Thank you, Mia." Meg nodded with a smile, not forgetting to remind her, "Remember to add ice." I want some too. I want some good beer too." Amy raised her little hand and yelled with a piece of beef in her mouth. "No, Mia is still young. She can't drink. Mia is still underage. She can't drink either. You can only drink when you're older." Meg shook his head with a serious expression. If this guy had been drinking since he was young, it would be terrible. If his mother saw him in the future, she would definitely kill him. "All right." Amy was slightly disappointed, but seeing Meg's serious expression, she nodded obediently and continued to eat the kebabs in her hands. Soon, a happy expression appeared on her face again. Meg smiled. For this little glutton, as long as there was food, nothing was a problem. After waiting for a while, Yarbemia came out with a glass of beer with ice cubes. She gently placed it in front of Meg, and sat down again. "Thank you. Eat up. You've worked hard today." Meg smiled and took a bite of the spicy beef kebab. The delicious taste wreaked havoc in his mouth. The texture of the beef was not something that ordinary beef could compare to. It was many times better than the beef kebabs he had eaten in his previous life. As expected of a top-notch roast beef kebab that was born under his strict requirements. After swallowing the beef, his throat burned. He picked up the large glass of beer and gulped down a large mouthful. The ice-cold feeling penetrated his heart, and he couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. Eating kebabs was indeed a better match with cold beer. The rest of the beef went into the stomachs of the 3 people and 1 cat. They ate until their stomachs were slightly bulging. This kind of delicious food was simply too blissful. Yarbemia helped carry the grill that Amy had cooled down into the kitchen. Then, under Meg's instructions, she decorated the dining room with some ribbons and other decorations. Only then did she bid farewell to Meg and the others and leave. She still had to come to work early tomorrow morning, so she needed to go back early to rest. "Be careful on the way back," Meg said to Mia's back. He turned off the lights outside and took the leave slip that was hanging on the door. He carefully placed it in the drawer of the counter. He would probably need it often in the future. "Father, the dining room has become so beautiful. Are we going to invite a lot of guests tomorrow?" Amy looked at Meg expectantly and asked. The dining room was filled with colorful ribbons, and it was filled with a festive atmosphere. "Yes, we're going to invite all of our guests to our party. Regardless of whether we know them or not, as long as they're willing, they can come." Meg nodded with a smile. Even if it couldn't become a festival for everyone in this world, perhaps it could become an annual festival for Amy's family. "Then I'm going to invite Jessica, Daphne, Big Sister 1111, Big Bear, everyone." Amy looked at Meg with elation. She thought for a moment before asking, "But are we going to perform? Spring is here. Or summer is here. Well, if you're willing, of course you can perform." Meg nodded with a smile. He was embarrassed by his extreme lack of naming skills. As for the divine song that he could only name "Summer is Here," he was also a little exasperated. This damn system was never serious. After coaxing Amy to sleep, Meg took a hot shower and lay down on his bed. He fell into deep thought as he looked at the glowing mooncake experience bag and the 1 point of strength that had been added to it. Meg took a look at Amy, who was lying on the bed, and gritted his teeth. "System, I want to level up first. Just give me 1 point of strength. Would the host like to proceed with the recovery of strength in 2 batches, or would the host like to proceed with the recovery in 1 go?" The system prompted. "No shit, if I can do it in 1 go, then of course it's best." Meg replied without any hesitation. "Okay, because the recovery this time will cause a large commotion, please find an empty space to proceed with the recovery." The system's voice sounded again. Meg looked at Amy, who was sleeping peacefully on the bed, and got up to the balcony. He stood in the middle of the balcony and nodded. "System, I'm ready." Ding. "Host, please close your eyes and prepare to be struck by lightning." The system prompted. "Huh." Chapter 571. Fuck you, system. Mag only had time to curse in his heart before a bolt of silver lightning flashed across the sky like a silver thread. The lightning bolt that was as thick as a water bucket struck him directly on the head. The electric current instantly spread throughout his entire body, and his arms and legs began to tremble uncontrollably as if he were dancing in the lightning. That night, all of the residents of Chaos City heard a thunderclap, as if it had exploded right next to their ears. Many people were roused from their slumber, and they couldn't understand why there was such a loud clap of thunder when the moon was high up in the sky. "Mother, I think I saw someone dancing in the lightning," a little boy yelled excitedly as he leaned against the window. "Piss off and go to bed. Otherwise, I'll show you what it's like to dance under a plank." The curtains were drawn shut, and an authoritative woman's voice sounded. After an indeterminate period of time, Meg finally regained feeling in his body. He raised his hand to touch his face, only to find that his fingertips had gone numb, and he hurriedly put his hand down. He couldn't help but grumble internally, "System, it's just an upgrade to my physical strength. Why did you have to strike me with lightning? Do you think I'm transcending a tribulation?" His clothes had already been charred beyond recognition, and even the slightest movement would leave a trail of dust on the ground. Thankfully, the key areas of his body were still intact. "You were the one who requested to upgrade your physical strength by 1 point. Due to the fact that you were severely injured at the time, you would need to undergo a high-intensity lightning strike in order to recover your vitality. Normal electric current is no longer effective, so the system used a variety of conduction technologies to extract a portion of the lightning from the sky and guide it to your body. Shouldn't you be praising the greatness of science now?" The system's smug voice sounded. Meg rolled his eyes, and couldn't be bothered to argue with the system any further. Instead, he began to carefully sense his own body. The numbness in his muscles was quickly dispelling, and he slowly stepped forward. The feeling of power slowly flowed from his feet to his body, and with each step he took, he was struck by a brand new sensation. This was a feeling that he was more powerful than before, and this feeling was constantly improving. After reaching the edge of the balcony, Meg stopped in his tracks. The numbness brought on by the lightning had already been completely dispelled. He clenched his fists, and a sense of power welled up in his heart. He felt like he could kill an ironhide bull with a single punch. So this is what the physical quality of a level 3 knight feels like. This world is really mysterious. What's circulating in my body should be the so-called spiritual energy. Meg closed his eyes and carefully felt the thing that was circulating in his body. It was like a stream of chi, but also like a kind of liquid. Spiritual power was something unique to the Norland continent. Magic casters cultivated their spiritual power through meditation. Dragons were born with powerful physiques and the ability to constantly evolve. Demons could advance through bloodlines. Forest trolls and demons all had their own unique methods of advancement. The reason why the weak humans were able to establish themselves on the Norland continent, which was filled with powerful races, and gradually grow into one of the 8 major races, was not only due to the awakening of magic casters, but also due to the discovery and mastery of the cultivation of spiritual power, which gave ordinary humans a way to quickly advance in power, and gave them the ability to fight against powerful races and even giant dragons, which was also a decisive factor. Spiritual power could constantly push the limits of a human's body, and also allow them to unleash incredible strength and speed. This was why human knights weren't afraid of powerful demons. For example, a top-tier knight like Meg Alex could even slay dragons. However, not everyone could cultivate spiritual energy. Only 1 out of 100 could become a knight. Only after breaking through to the level 3 knight could one cultivate spiritual energy. After that, one's cultivation and spiritual energy were closely related to each other, and almost complemented each other. Meg opened his eyes and quickly strode over to the small room on the balcony. He picked up the long sword in the box in the corner, and stepped forward. The long sword was unsheathed, and a cold light flashed through the blade of the sword. It was as if the air had been sliced open, and even the moonlight seemed to have blurred slightly. A faint smile appeared on Meg's face. It was the same sword strike, but it was clearly faster and more powerful than before. What he had to do now was improve his swordsmanship to a level that matched his power as quickly as possible. After stowing away his sword and cleaning up the rags on the ground, Meg went downstairs to take a shower before entering the test field for the god of cookery to learn how to make mooncakes and practice his swordsmanship. However, as soon as he entered the bathroom, he was given a fright by his own reflection in the mirror. In the mirror, he was completely black, with only a pair of charred black shorts on his body. He looked like a miner who had just crawled out of a mine. Only his teeth were white, and his short hair was spiky, making him look very fashionable. "System, I'm only at the 3rd tier, and I've already been struck by lightning. Will I be struck by lightning 5 times next?" Meg asked as he looked at himself in the mirror with a strange expression. "Host, don't worry. This system won't do something so cruel." The system's voice sounded with a hint of consolation. "You haven't experienced 2 strikes of lightning yet, right? Let's take it 1 step at a time. There's no need to rush." Meg, who was just about to relax, raised an eyebrow. As expected, the system couldn't be trusted. The first strike of lightning today had already shocked him to death. If there were 2 strikes, he would probably be electrocuted to death. Furthermore, if someone told him to slim down like a bolt of lightning in the future, he would definitely tell them that lightning was at least as thick as water. Although he was angry, Meg still quickly began to wash up. The layer of soot and soot on his body was quickly washed away, and his skin returned to its normal color. It was bright and white, and it should have been nourished by lightning. It felt quite delicate to the touch. His thin and frail body had now become very normal. Although he didn't have exaggerated bulging muscles, his well-proportioned body didn't lose any sense of strength. He could clearly see a six-pack on his lower abdomen, and he was very satisfied with all of this. This was completely his ideal body. Withdrawing his narcissistic gaze, Meg put on a set of pajamas and tiptoed into the room. As soon as he lay down on the bed, he immediately opened the shiny golden experience bag in his mind. A wave of information flowed into Meg's mind, and it quickly merged with his memories, quickly becoming Meg's experience and memories. So, can the ingredients be slightly less high-end? After listening to the system's introduction, Meg could already guess that the melon seeds were going to be sold by the seeds. Host, as an excellent chef, the most basic requirement is to carefully prepare every dish. This requirement should be done to the extreme from the moment you choose the ingredients. Choosing inferior ingredients when there are better options is a disrespect to the guests. It is also a blasphemy to the word chef, the system's solemn voice sounded. System, do you think there's something wrong with my brain? I don't know how many people will come to the gala tomorrow, but it definitely won't be any less than the number of people who came to watch the gala tonight. Even if everyone only eats 1 mooncake, I'll have to give out at least 2,000 to 3,000 mooncakes. Those are all free. If the cost of the ingredients is too high, won't I be making a huge loss? Meg rolled his eyes with a grin, and said, how about this? I'll take the 99 melon seeds that you discarded. I'll also take all of the almonds that were eliminated due to the difference in size. In any case, pack up all of the leftover ingredients that you chose for me. It's quite a pity that you threw them away, so I'll kindly accept all of them. I'll purchase them according to the current market price. I won't earn a single cent from this deal. I'm completely helping you, a vegetable farmer. Even though it sounds very reasonable, I still feel like something isn't quite right. The system was a little hesitant as it said, so, should I be moved? Isn't this worth crying over? Meg asked in a matter-of-fact manner. A faint smile appeared on his face as he washed his hands and began to knead the dough to make the mooncakes. Chapter 573. In a small courtyard in the northern part of Chaos City, there was a room lit by a dim oil lamp. 8 people in black with a black cloth over their faces were sitting around a long table. The black-robed figure sitting at the head of the table looked at everyone present and said in a serious voice, "This is already the 10th day that we've been in Chaos City, and we still haven't found anything. We've already searched through all of the civilian areas, but we still haven't found anything related to that man. As such, I'm going to adjust our search strategy and change our target from that man to a half-elf girl between 3 and 5 years of age. But leader, General Seuss told us to continue searching through all of the areas according to our original plan. It doesn't seem like a good idea to suddenly change our target." A thin black-robed figure sitting down hesitantly said. All of the other black-robed figures were also rather hesitant. General Seuss has actually already given up on Chaos City, and the second prince's secret letter suggests the same. He believes that man will appear on the Demon Islands instead of Chaos City. Narsun shook his head, and said, however, our team can only continue to search Chaos City until we receive the order. In that case, there's no need for us to continue searching, right? Perhaps General Seuss will be able to find that man very soon. Indeed, General Seuss must have received some concrete information, and that's why he rushed to the Demon Islands in such a hurry. All of the black-robed figures chimed in upon hearing that. We receive many pieces of information like that every day. We've been to the Demon Islands no less than 10 times, but we still haven't found anything. Narsun shook his head again before turning to all of the black-robed figures, and said in a serious voice, I still think that Chaos City is the most likely place for that man to be hiding, as it's much more difficult to detect him here than it is to hide in the wilderness. All of you know who that man is. We haven't been able to ascertain whether he's dead or not in the past 3 years, but if he really is still alive and we can find and kill him in Chaos City, then all of you will become heroes of the Black Falcons. Narsun raised his voice slightly as he continued, the generous rewards will be enough for us to retire for the rest of our lives. If you're willing to stay in the Black Falcons, then you'll no longer just be ordinary members of the Black Falcons. Instead, you'll be on par with the general, and be revered by all of the Black Falcons. The eyes of the black-robed men gradually lit up as they looked at Narsun. It was as if a light was shining from the depths of their eyes. Tell us what we should do, leader. We'll do whatever you say. The thin black-robed man from before looked at Narsun with an excited expression, and his eyes were filled with fervor and excitement. It's very simple. We'll be able to find a half-elf girl between 3 and 5 years of age. Compared to a crippled young man, that's clearly a man. You of the Black Falcons, and the Black Falcons ask right of course, and you resist S. You'll be skipping past the areas that you've already checked and heading south. You're not looking for speed, but you must be careful. Narsun nodded. I've already been following Louis for over half a year, and I've never noticed anything strange about him. I haven't seen him use any private means to communicate with the outside world, either. Perhaps there's nothing going on between him and Alex, and he's just a crippled merchant. Could it be that His Highness' suspicions are wrong? The observation period will be up in a month, and I'll be able to end this surveillance mission. There shouldn't be any disturbances, right? A black-robed figure murmured to himself on a large tree outside a tavern. He was staring intently at a figure who was pacing back and forth in a room on the 2nd floor of the tavern. After a while, the lights went out, and that person seemed to have fallen asleep. Where is Alex? Bertley stayed on the tree for a long while, and only slowly slid down the tree after ascertaining that there was no movement in that room. He quickly disappeared into the inky black alleyway. Not long after that, a carrier pigeon flew out of Chaos City toward the north. 8 types of mooncakes, 8 different cooking methods, and 8 completely different requirements. Meg patiently completed all of them to perfection, and only after passing all of the system's requirements did he begin to practice his swordsmanship in the trial field. The next morning, Meg was awakened by the sound of his alarm clock. He turned it off, and got out of bed as soon as he opened his eyes. He sat on the edge of his bed, and once again sensed the powerful energy coursing through his body. A smile appeared on his face, and he made his way over to Amy's bedside before going downstairs to prepare the ingredients that he would need for the morning service. A long line had already formed in front of the restaurant early in the morning. Many of them were customers who had come early in the morning to line up after watching the battle between Meg and Ricky the day before. When Sally and Yarbemia arrived, they were both surprised to see that the line was more than twice as long as usual. I think it's because Boss beat the fat owner of the rotisserie yesterday, and all of these customers came early in the morning after seeing Boss's rotisserie kebabs, Yarbemia said with a contemplative expression. Rotisserie kebabs? Sally turned to Yarbemia with a perplexed expression. Aisha, you didn't come last night, so I came here because I had nothing to do. Boss and Amy just so happened to come back. Yarbemia recalled that Sally hadn't come last night, so she gave them a brief recount of what had happened. In the end, she excitedly said, Boss's rotisserie kebabs are super delicious. I don't think I've ever had such delicious rotisserie meat in my life. Boss said that he's going to hold a mid-autumn festival banquet tonight, and is going to invite many customers to eat mooncakes. It's definitely going to be another type of delicious food. I didn't think that I would have missed such an exciting cooking competition last night. Sally wore a wistful expression. She had been to the restaurant in the morning and at noon the day before, but Meg hadn't come back, so she didn't come back at night. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? Chapter 574. All of the customers in the line sighed as they watched the bicycle disappear into the distance. It seemed that it wasn't going to be easy to enjoy the delicious roast beef kebabs. They had to be patient. There were also some who were in awe of Amy's adorable little magician's robe. Meg carried Julian's breakfast and held Amy's little hand as they walked into Chaos School. The guard and the orc greeted them politely, and looked at Amy with admiration in their eyes. Everyone in Chaos School knew that this little girl had defeated the challengers from the Wrath Empire. Everyone regarded this little girl as a hero for upholding the school's honor. Amy responded politely to everyone who greeted her along the way. She didn't become arrogant because of the attention. "Father, it seems like everyone likes me now," Amy said happily as she looked up at Meg. "That's right. Our little Amy did what she was supposed to do. She defeated the bad guy, so everyone likes her. You have to do the same in the future. More and more people will like you." Meg nodded with a smile. Who wouldn't like such an adorable little girl when he saw the adorable smile on Amy's face? When they arrived at the Magic Academy's teaching building, Amy noticed a group of dwarfs busily laying the foundation of the building in an empty plot of land not far away. They were already in full swing early in the morning. Teacher Crassus said that he's going to build a magic classroom over there. Amy will be teaching there in the future, Amy said as she pointed at the empty plot of land. "I see. Looks like Amy will be able to study in a bigger and more interesting magic classroom in the future." Meg's eyes lit up. When Crassus had accepted Amy as his disciple, he had promised to build a new professional magic classroom for her. He had thought that it would take some time, but he didn't think that construction would start so soon. Building an advanced magic classroom was very expensive, especially when it was built according to Crassus standards. Chaos School, which couldn't even afford to renovate the teaching building, clearly couldn't afford this. He didn't think that Crassus would be so rich. "Mr. Mac, why did you take Amy to skip class again yesterday?" "I say, it's fine if you skip class, but why do you always choose to skip my class?" "Let's not talk about that first. You didn't even bring me breakfast this time. Do you know how uncomfortable it is for me to go without food for a whole day? I'm just a bag of old bones. Why do I have to suffer like this?" As soon as Meg knocked on the magic classroom door. "Crassus, this is your breakfast. I went out to collect ingredients yesterday. The restaurant has a new dish. You can try it at noon." Meg quickly passed the breakfast in his hand to Crassus. This kind old man was not to be trifled with when he was angry. A new dish. Crassus' interest was immediately piqued, and he reached out to take the breakfast. "Yes, Teacher Crassus. Father's new beef kebab is super delicious. You should try it this afternoon. You'll love it for sure." Amy chimed in. Crassus nodded at Meg and said, "All right, I'll forgive you this time for little Amy's sake. But next time, if you want to take Amy to skip class again, you have to choose a time when Julian is in class. Otherwise, that fellow's progress will be faster than mine, and he'll definitely brag to me that long-range magic is better than melee magic." "All right, I'll try my best to choose a suitable time." Meg nodded as he patted Amy's head with a smile, and said, "Then I'm going back to cook now. Sorry to bother you, Amy." "Goodbye, Father." Amy waved at Meg before following Crassus into the magic lab. Meg exited Chaos School and rode his bicycle toward the restaurant. He stopped in front of Ricky's rotisserie and discovered that the restaurant's doors were tightly shut. 3 of the signboards had already been torn down, and there was no one in the restaurant. Everything was strewn about chaotically, and it appeared that it had been cleaned up the night before. However, the tables and chairs appeared to still be in good condition, so it would most likely only require some simple modifications before it could open for business. Ricky's rotisserie was around 3 times the size of Amy's, with over 200 square meters of space. Furthermore, it was located near the entrance to the square, so there was a lot of traffic. Its location was far superior to that of Mammoth, which was located in the corner of the square. Just those 2 factors alone would allow the restaurant to earn tens of thousands of copper coins per month. If he were to purchase the restaurant, he would have to pay at least 10 million copper coins to purchase it. However, the restaurant now belonged to Meg. Meg had been too busy to complete the handover last night, so he hadn't been in a hurry to complete the handover. After the morning service, he was going to make a trip to the City Lord's castle to seek assistance from the Aiden Square Management Office so that he could officially take over the restaurant. If he were to sell the restaurant, Meg would indeed receive a large sum of money. With such a prime location, he wouldn't have to worry about a lack of takers. However, after an entire night of contemplation, Meg had already made up his mind. As such, he wasn't planning to sell the restaurant. Instead, he was planning to make it the first branch of Mammoth. Aside from the restaurant on the first floor, he could also make full use of the space on the second floor, thereby providing ample conditions for Mammoth to expand. It's better than I thought, but the key is still to fool the system in order for the plan to proceed. Aside from diverting some of the customers, the branch will also bring in more revenue. However, I'm not in a hurry to expand on a large scale right now. I'll focus on making it bigger. Meg looked at Ricky's rotisserie, which was a little deserted, and nodded with a pleased expression before riding his bicycle toward the restaurant. When Meg returned to the restaurant, Sally and MIA had already finished their breakfast. Meg changed into his chef's uniform, and he glanced at the clock on the wall before quickly making his way over to the restaurant. He opened the door to the restaurant, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the ridiculously long line outside. Welcome. Everyone filed in, and the restaurant was quickly filled to the brim. Boss, I want 10 beef kebabs. Do you have to be so fierce this early in the morning? No, I want 10 kebabs as well. You're going to be a huge blow to the customers in the line. So, please give me 9 kebabs. She had to deal with a lot of such guests every day, but there seemed to be more of them this morning. The customer looked at Yarbemia's calm smile, and he was a little embarrassed by his own thoughts. He hesitated momentarily before closing the menu, and nodding as he said, "Then give me a spicy kebab and a sauce-flavored kebab." Randy's blacksmith shop had only just begun to take off, and he hadn't recouped his initial investment yet. Spending 600 copper coins for breakfast was quite extravagant for him, but after witnessing the battle the night before, he was deeply attracted to the alluring aroma of the kebabs. Even though it was a little expensive, he still wanted to taste the kebabs for himself. Some of the customers in the queue hesitated for a moment before choosing to leave. The price of 300 copper coins was not something that everyone could afford. This kind of extravagance belonged to a minority of people. Mr. Mac's dishes are always top-notch, so don't worry. It's definitely a bargain to be able to eat such delicious food at such a low price. The regulars of Mammoth ordered their dishes one after another. Many of them were quite familiar with the new dish, and the price wasn't expensive compared to the other dishes. It was completely within the acceptable range. In the kitchen, Meg looked at the customers leaving and sighed in his heart. He also wanted to bring a delicious experience to everyone, but for the current Mammoth, it was obviously impossible. He needed more money to upgrade the restaurant, buy more strength points, and increase his strength. Before he had the ability to protect himself, no one could stop him from earning money. The 2-meter-long grill was filled with kebabs. Meg deftly flipped the kebabs, and then brushed them with 3 different sauces. The rich aroma of the kebabs instantly filled the kitchen. The kebabs were placed on plates according to the order that MIA had ordered, and Yarbemia carried them out and placed in front of the customers. The rich aroma of the kebabs spread in the restaurant, and the customers couldn't help but salivate. The customers who were still hesitating before began to order their dishes. With such an aroma and the reviews of the 5 judges yesterday, it would be cruel to not try it. Apart from the kebabs, there's also a beer. It's a pity that it's not good to drink alcohol so early in the morning. I'll try it again at night. Many customers also noticed the beer on the menu, but since it was still morning, not many chose to drink. Harrison, who had come to line up early in the morning, had successfully obtained the first batch of kebabs. He didn't know how many times he had swallowed his saliva last night. This time, looking at the 5 kebabs in front of him, he reached out and grabbed a garlic-flavored kebab, put it to his mouth, and blew on it. Ignoring the fact that it was still a little hot, he opened his mouth and bit into the beef. This taste. Harrison's eyes immediately widened. The rich sauce combined with the delicious and juicy beef was like a delicious fireball exploding in his mouth. The garlic's aroma was not stimulating, and it blended perfectly with the other spices. However, it gave him a distinct and irresistible experience. The beef was tender and juicy, and the fatty meat didn't appear to be greasy in the slightest. Instead, it enhanced the texture of the beef significantly, and compared to lean beef, it was undoubtedly more delicious after being roasted. Phew! This is unimaginably delicious. 300 copper coins, it's worth every penny. Harrison swallowed the beef in his mouth with a look of praise on his face. He didn't have time to say anything else as he took another bite of the beef. He closed his eyes with an expression of bliss as he savored the delicious flavor wreaking havoc in his mouth. The sound of praise rang out in the restaurant one after another, and all of the doubts that had been raised about the price completely disappeared in that instant. Some of the customers who were still standing immediately placed their orders after receiving permission to do so. After all, the roast beef had to be held in one's hand. Even though it wasn't very elegant to eat it with one's hand, if they wanted to wait for a seat, many people would be late for work because of a kebab. Thus, there were many people walking quickly on the streets of the Aden Square with kebabs in their hands, and horse-drawn carriages passing by, leaving behind the fragrant aroma of roast meat. Following the conclusion of the morning service, Mag heaved a long sigh of relief. All of the beef kebabs that he had prepared had been sold, and the vast majority of customers had also tasted them. He hadn't let down his efforts and the large portions of beef kebabs that he had prepared early in the morning. Chapter 576. Meg stopped the car in front of the City Lord's castle, and his eyes lit up at the sight of the grand Western-style building. Large white stone pillars that were engraved with decorative patterns were connected together, and the greyish-white domed buildings were distributed in a picturesque manner. The two large iron gates at the entrance were wide open, and the words City Master's Mansion were written on them using the common language of the world. This was the first time Meg had come to the City Lord's castle. Dicus was the one who had asked him to sign the contract for the open-air restaurant, so he had to ask for directions first. "Mr. Mac, why are you here? Do you have something to do?" A familiar voice sounded from behind Meg before he had even walked through the gate. Mag turned around and smiled as he said, "Greetings, Master Dicus. I'm here to take over a restaurant in the City Lord's castle, and I need to go to the Aden Square office to complete some procedures." Take over a restaurant? Could it be that Mr. Mac is preparing to open a new branch? Dicus looked at Meg with a surprised expression. "Not yet. There was a restaurant owner yesterday." Meg shook his head with a smile, and gave Dicus a brief recount of what had happened the night before. Dicus was an official of the City Lord's castle, and if he could help, the process of taking over the restaurant would be a lot simpler. "I didn't think that someone would dare to challenge Mr. Mac to a cooking duel." "That's very brave of you." Dicus smiled as he pointed at the gate of the City Lord's castle, and said, "However, since you've already signed the duel agreement, and there are so many witnesses here, that restaurant naturally belongs to Mr. Mac now. Let me take you in. The procedures will be completed soon, and Mr. Mac will only have to pay a small fee." "Thank you." Meg nodded as he followed Dicus into the City Lord's castle. The buildings in the City Lord's mansion were symmetrical, with two-story buildings on both sides. The staff of the City Lord's mansion and the people coming in and out of the buildings on the left. In comparison, the buildings on the right were much quieter. The department on the left is responsible for the daily affairs of Chaos City. They have to receive many residents and take care of many things every day, so they're quite busy. The department on the right is responsible for the daily patrols of Chaos City, so it's a little quieter. That's because most of their work is done outside the City Lord's jurisdiction, Dicus explained. Mag nodded with a contemplative expression before asking, "I see. Which department does Master Dicus belong to in the City Lord's castle?" "I'm currently part of the City Lord's mansion's secretariat. I'm actually responsible for running errands everywhere," Dicus said with a smile. "This leg, but many people want to run." Meg chuckled as he reassessed Dicus. Even though he didn't know much about the administrative structure of the City Lord's mansion, this man clearly wasn't just an ordinary errand boy. Dicus led Meg into an office with the words Aiden Square Office hanging on the door. There were a dozen or so staff members in the City Lord's mansion's uniform busily receiving people. One of them, a middle-aged man who looked like the head of the department, hurriedly stood up to greet Dicus. He smiled and said, "What brings you here, Sir Dicus?" "I'm here to show Mr. Meg the way. He needs to take care of the handover of a restaurant that he won in a cooking competition. Please help him with that, Lord Reed." The last time the City Lord presided over the negotiation between the dragons and demons, it was held at Mr. Meg's restaurant, Dicus said with a smile. A hint of surprise flashed through Reed's eyes upon hearing this. He turned to Meg with a smile, and said, "I see. Please take a seat, Mr. Meg. Our office is dedicated to handling all matters in the Aiden Square. Since you won that restaurant in a cooking competition, do you have the agreement?" "Yes, it's right here." Meg nodded as he pulled out the agreement with both of their fingerprints, and handed it to Reed. Reed carefully read through the agreement, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. However, he still carefully put the agreement away. He looked at Meg with a smile, and said, "All right, Mr. Meg. You can go back for now. We'll verify the authenticity of this agreement, then seal the restaurant and appraise its value. You'll be notified once we're done. All you have to do is pay a processing fee, and you can officially own the restaurant." "All right, I'll have to trouble you then." Meg nodded. He didn't think that the process would be so simple. All he had to do was pay a processing fee. However, this was exactly what he wanted. After all, his time was more valuable than the processing fee. "Of course. You can go back and wait for the news," Reed said with a smile. After exiting the office, Dicus turned to Meg and asked, "I went to Hyder to get some information. They've made some progress with their steam engine. I have to report this to the City Lord as well. Is there anything else you need me to do, Mr. Meg?" "There's nothing else I need to do. Please lead the way, Mr. Dicus." Meg shook his head. It had been a while since he'd seen Hyder, and he didn't know what progress they'd made with their steam engine. This was a bit urgent news for his plan. He thought for a moment, and asked, "By the way, I'm curious about the City Lord's castle's progress with the incident involving the miners' families in the northern part of the city. Would it be convenient for you to tell me, Mr. Dicus? I almost forgot that Mr. Meg was also a witness to this incident, and played a very important role in it. Of course I can tell you about the progress." Dicus shook his head, and a serious expression appeared on his face as he continued, "The renovation project funded by the City Lord's castle is almost complete. The living conditions of the miners' families will be significantly improved. At the same time, the City Lord's castle has verified the compensation and funeral funds that the miners' families have embezzled over the years. They've all been distributed, and all children of suitable age have the opportunity to become students of Chaos School. All of the people involved in this case have been arrested, and they'll face the most severe punishment. I'm sure the City Lord's castle will give all of the miners' families a fair result." Meg nodded. This was undoubtedly a good result for those who had lived in the abyss. The City Lord's castle had already shown enough sincerity. Dicus nodded at Meg and said, "The City Lord once said that if there were more nosy people like Meg in this world, then Chaos City would definitely become a better place. I hope something like this won't happen again. After all, this is Chaos City, isn't it?" Meg shook his head, and bade farewell to Dicus before exiting the City Lord's castle. Chapter 577. In the miners' residential area in the northern part of the city, the low, greyish-black, dilapidated houses had been transformed into brand-new two-story buildings. The exterior walls were painted in bright green, blue, pink, a sea of bright colors, making people feel as if they were in spring in this autumn day. Dwarven craftsmen were busy in the small buildings. Strong orcs were stacking square stones on the walls. Old people and women were holding paintbrushes and painting the walls with bright colors. They all had happy smiles on their faces, just like those bright colors. The children were running and laughing on the road paved with bluestone slabs. A simple football made of rattan had become their favorite toy. A large group of children ran with the rattan ball, and their laughter spread throughout the miners' residential area. The rattan ball was kicked away by the leading child. It rolled a few times, and a bicycle was unable to stop in time, so it ran over the ball. Creak, the bicycle came to a stop, and Mag turned around to look at the ball of rattan that had been flattened into a ball of rattan. He then turned to look at the children who had suddenly stopped in their tracks. They looked at Mag's bicycle, and then at the ball of rattan on the ground with expressions of disbelief on their faces. He was also rather stunned. "Boo-hoo, he flattened our ball. We don't have a ball to play with." A 4 or 5-year-old child was the first to cry. Then, as if the crying was contagious, more than 20 children started crying in an instant. The crying was so loud that it attracted a lot of attention. Many adults even wanted to rush over. "Don't cry, don't cry. It's a rattan ball. I'll give you a better one." Meg hurriedly waved his hand. These little guys were really not to be trifled with. Even Amy never cried like this. Amy's father. A surprised voice suddenly rang out among the children. A little girl squeezed out and ran happily in front of Meg. She looked up at Meg. "Are you here to see me? Where's Amy? Is Amy here?" "Yes, I'm here to see Jessica. Amy has class today, so she didn't come. But you'll see her tonight." Meg looked at Jessica, who was looking up at him, and smiled as he reached out to stroke her hair. This little girl still looked so cute. "It's you. That person from that day." As the crowd gathered around, an old man saw Meg pushing the bicycle. His eyes lit up and he couldn't help but exclaim. The eyes of the people who were originally worried that something might happen to their children lit up one after another. Clearly, they all recognized the young man who had killed the bully. Thank you for saving us all." The old man who spoke earlier immediately knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to Meg. The rest of the people also pulled their children to kneel on the ground and kowtowed to Meg to thank him. "Everyone, please get up. I'm just doing what I should do." Meg quickly stopped the bicycle and reached out to pull the old man up. Only then did the rest of the people get up. However, they still looked at Meg with eyes full of gratitude. The crying children looked at the squashed rattan ball, and then looked at Meg. Tears glistened in their eyes, but no one continued to cry. Meg looked at the pairs of bright eyes, and he felt a little conflicted. They had changed into new clothes, and their faces had regained some color. But now, they only had what they should have had. This was a life that had been exchanged with the lives of their loved ones, and yet they were so grateful. The crowd was silent. Meg didn't know what to say. After hesitating for a moment, he pointed at the houses and said with a smile, "The houses are very beautiful." Everyone laughed as well. Beautiful smiles blossomed on their previously stone-like faces. "Mr. Meg, you're here." Rebecca pushed open the door of a pink house and came out with a piece of embroidered cloth in her hand. She looked at Meg with surprise. "Yes, I'm here to see Jessica." Meg nodded with a smile. "Then come in and drink some water," Rebecca hurriedly said. Meg was also not used to being stared at with strange eyes by a group of people. After nodding slightly in greeting, he followed Jessica and Rebecca into the pink house. The floor of the house was paved with bluestone, and it was flat and clean. Although there was only an old wooden table and 2 chairs in the house, and it was almost empty, it was much better than the dilapidated house from before. "Please take a seat, I'll go get you some water," Rebecca said, and then turned to go into the back room. Meg pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at Jessica, who was sitting opposite him and supporting her chin with her hands. He smiled and said, "What are you thinking about, Jessica?" "I'm wondering if Amy will come over tonight. You just said that I would be able to see her tonight," Jessica said with anticipation. Mag turned to Jessica with a smile, and said, "No, I'm here to invite Jessica to the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet. We're going to hold a very big banquet tonight. Do you want to come? Party. Can I really go?" Jessica's eyes lit up, and she looked at Meg with some incredulity. "Of course, Jessica and your mother can both come." Meg nodded seriously. "How could I trouble you again? Rebecca came out with a bowl of water and gently placed it in front of Meg, and shook her head with embarrassment. How could it be troublesome? Everyone is invited to the party tonight, so there will be more people and it will be more lively. You can bring your children to play. Meg took a sip of the water. It was refreshing and sweet, and the water quality was much better than last time. Rebecca looked at Meg's sincere gaze, and Jessica's expectant gaze, and hesitated for a moment before nodding. Then I'll have to trouble you. That's great. I love parties. A happy smile appeared on Jessica's face. Meg looked at a piece of cloth and a needle and thread basket on the table. There was a blooming flower embroidered on the cloth, and it looked a bit like embroidery. He curiously asked, "Are you doing embroidery now?" "Embroidery?" Rebecca looked at Meg with confusion, and followed his gaze to the cloth on the table. She was a little embarrassed as she said, "I'm just doing embroidery for a cloth shop. The City Lord's castle has given us all the compensation, and Jessica will also have the opportunity to go to school, so I want to continue doing some work to earn money for Jessica's education. Going to school is a good thing." Meg nodded, and picked up the cloth on the table to examine it carefully. The needlework was very delicate. "Mr. Mac, here's a dragon coin. The compensation has been given, and the City Lord's castle has built a new house for us. I'm returning this money to you, and I'm really grateful." Rebecca pulled out a dragon coin from her pocket, and handed it to Meg with gratitude. "I'm sure things will get better and better in the future." Meg accepted the dragon coin, and drank the water in his hand. He stood up with a smile, and said, "Then I'll be looking forward to your visit tonight. Amy also misses Jessica very much." "Okay, I'll bring the child." Rebecca nodded, and walked Meg out with Jessica. "System, give me a soccer ball," Meg said in his mind, and looked at the soccer ball that quickly appeared in the cart's basket. He pushed the bicycle towards the group of children who were surrounding the crushed rattan ball with worried expressions, trying to make it into a ball again. "Children, I accidentally crushed your ball just now. I'm very sorry, so I'll give you a new soccer ball." Meg stopped beside them, and looked at the resentful gazes directed at him. He reached out and took the soccer ball out of the cart's basket. The children's eyes lit up. The ball with black and white cubes on its surface looked more advanced than the rattan ball. "Go and play, but don't kick at sharp places or other people's windows." Meg threw the soccer ball out, and it bounced a few times on the limestone floor before rolling forward. The children immediately burst into cheers, and then rushed towards the soccer ball. Meg shook his head with a smile, and pushed the bicycle away. After lunch, Mammoth was going to hold a grand mid-autumn festival banquet, and everyone was invited to the banquet, attracting a lot of attention. Of course, this attention was mostly limited to Mammoth's regulars. Those who weren't familiar with Mammoth thought that this was just a marketing strategy. This was quite common in the Aden Square, and some of the larger restaurants offered even greater discounts and free gifts. After all, this restaurant was only offering mooncakes, which they had never heard of before. The temporary stage has been set up. "MIA, Sally, you guys put some of the mooncakes on the stage. I'll go make some more mooncakes." There might be a lot of people coming tonight. At the entrance of the restaurant, Mag, whose apron was stained with flour, looked at the makeshift stage that Morbai and the others had set up for him. "Mr. Mac, do you need our help?" 1111 and Lulu made their way over with smiles on their faces. Chapter 578. Meg spent the entire day making mooncakes, and he cancelled the dinner service so that he could focus on making more mooncakes in preparation for the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala that night. The restaurant had a simple decor, with little colored lights twined around the tree at the entrance of the restaurant a few times. There was a small sign on the lawn that told people not to step on it, and there was a large open space behind the lawn. That was clearly the main venue for tonight's gala, as the stage had been set up there. Meg's idea was very simple. He wanted to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival in this world, so he could bring together both familiar and unfamiliar people. Prior to the expansion of the restaurant, there was no need for publicity. Just the current number of customers was enough to fill the restaurant to capacity every day. This owner really is something. His restaurant has only been open for a little over a month, and has already made it onto the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board, then won over a major restaurant, and now, he's holding this Mid-Autumn Festival Gala. I know, right? Ricky's Rotisserie is located at the entrance of the Aiden Square, and it takes up quite a lot of space. If he were to move his restaurant there, his business would definitely increase by several fold. Speaking of which, we should be thanking him. In the past, we rarely had customers here, but recently, our business has been increasing by leaps and bounds. Many of our customers are coming out for another meal after eating at Immerse. Immerse has always been different from ours. Their food starts at 200 copper coins, and they're targeting high-end restaurants. However, both rich and poor people like to eat there. Even if it's just a small dessert, customers who aren't full and don't have much money will naturally choose to eat at our restaurant. I can already sense that Duca's restaurant's position is being threatened. If these two restaurants were to clash one day, it would definitely be very interesting. In the distance, the restaurant owners had gathered together again, and they were discussing in low voices. However, on this occasion, the atmosphere was quite harmonious, and everyone was chatting and laughing. A horse-drawn carriage drove past everyone, and Gloria lifted the curtain to look in the direction of Immerse with a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "Will Mr. Meg agree?" Gloria murmured to herself, but her gaze gradually became determined. She clenched her fists, and said, "This is the only chance we have to turn the tables. We have to get Mr. Mag's permission first." The carriage stopped in front of the restaurant and Gloria slowly got off the carriage. She looked at Meg, who was about to walk into the restaurant, and quickly said, "Mr. Meg, please wait a moment." "Miss Gloria, are you looking for me?" Meg turned around and looked at Gloria in surprise. She hadn't come to the restaurant for the past few days. "Yes, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. I wonder if you have time now?" Gloria nodded. She was a little nervous as she gripped her skirt, but her eyes were still staring into Meg's eyes. "Although I don't know what you want to discuss with me, if it doesn't take up too much of my time, then please come in. The restaurant will be holding the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet soon, so I'll be a little busy, so I don't have much time." Meg looked into Gloria's beautiful lavender eyes with a smile. "It won't take up too much of your time." Gloria's face lit up with joy as she quickly nodded and followed Meg into the restaurant. "Please take a seat. What does Miss Gloria want to discuss with me?" Meg came out with a cup of water and gently placed it on the table as he looked at Gloria and spoke in a gentle voice. Gloria looked at Meg, and her originally nervous heart calmed down a lot. She sat down on a chair and looked at Meg, who was sitting across from her. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "Mr. Meg, I'm here today to obtain your authorization for the design of Amy's dress." "Authorization for the design of the dress?" Meg was stunned. He looked into Gloria's sincere eyes and was a little confused for a moment. "Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Gloria Morton, the eldest granddaughter of family Morton. I'm currently one of the candidates for the successor of the family Morton, and I'll be competing with my second uncle, Cyril Morton, for the position of sole successor." Gloria looked at Meg with a sincere expression. Meg raised an eyebrow and looked at the beautiful girl in front of him with undisguised surprise in his eyes. Family Morton had controlled the Aiden Chamber of Commerce for decades, and was also the first family that he wanted to overthrow in his plan. The Aiden Chamber of Commerce and the family Morton behind it had become the largest group of people in Chaos City who discriminated against half-breeds because of that old man, Jeffrey Morton. What Meg didn't expect was that this beautiful girl, who had been wearing a veil before taking it off under the special effects of the tofu pudding, was actually one of the candidates for the successor of family Morton. This wasn't in the information that he had obtained about the family Morton, so his first reaction was that this girl was probably a fraud. "My father is Lance Morton, and he used to be the successor of family Morton. However, he later became a teacher at Chaos School. After taking off my veil, I made a bet with my grandfather and won the position of successor." "You said that we should choose what we want to do, right?" Gloria said to Meg. "I see. Then congratulations, Miss Gloria. But what does this have to do with the authorization of the dress?" Meg raised an eyebrow. Everything made sense now. According to the information that he had received, Geoffrey Morton's eldest son did indeed have an 18-year-old daughter, but there was very little information about her, and he didn't even know her name. Who would have thought that she would become the successor of family Morton in the blink of an eye after taking off her veil? Even though I've become the successor, my grandfather clearly doesn't really want to hand over family Morton to me. It's more likely that he wants me to become the wolf behind Cyril and force him to grow. As such, what I received was a textiles shop that had been incurring heavy losses for several years in a row. Furthermore, my grandfather gave me a 1-month deadline. If I can't turn the losses into profits, he'll close the shop, and my investigation will come to an end. Gloria leaned forward slightly as she looked at Meg with an earnest expression, and said, "Hence, I thought of making clothes of different sizes out of all of the fabrics that had been stored in the shop for many years. I also thought of the clothes that Mr. Meg designed for Amy and the waitresses in the restaurant. Those clothes are all very beautiful and unique, and I'm sure that all of our customers will love them if we release them. Getting rid of the inventory and developing a more profitable business system at the same time. This is a very good idea, and it's very innovative." Mag looked at Gloria with approval in his eyes. In this era where tailoring was still the norm, Gloria's idea of mass-producing clothes according to measurements was very far-sighted. Her background as a wealthy merchant family was on full display at this moment. However, he shook his head at the sight of the smile that gradually blossomed on Gloria's face. "But I don't want Amy and Mia to wear the same clothes whenever they walk down the street." "But..." A hint of anxiety appeared on Gloria's face. Chapter 579. Host, as a super-professional gourmet system, I would never do something like selling clothing designs, the system said firmly. The new underwear I bought yesterday is quite comfortable. System, your improvements are excellent, Meg said with a smile. Of course, the system has combined the design concepts of the top underwear designers in the world to create the most stylish underwear. At the same time, it has chosen the best fabric, breathable and absorbent, and maintains the best temperature at all times. Wearing the underwear I designed. The system said proudly. TSK, our super professional gourmet system is also super professional when it comes to making underwear. If this is the case, it shouldn't be a problem to sell a few sets of clothing designs, right? Meg interrupted the system with a teasing tone. That, of course, this matter can still be discussed. However, the host must uphold the most basic integrity of a businessman and ensure that the transaction is transparent and fair. The design cannot be sold a second time, the system said sternly. System, if you sell a pair of shoes, why do you care how others wear them? Meg curled his lips, but quickly smiled and said, of course, as an excellent businessman, I still agree with some of your words. As for the designs, let's sell them at the price of 20 gold coins each. You half, I half. In other words, I will pay you 10 gold coins for each design. After that, you can pack 1,000 sets of women's clothing designs in one go. It would be best if they were based on the design concepts of the top designers. At the same time, they should be perfectly integrated with the style of this world to create the best women's clothing designs. Ding. The transaction is confirmed. 10,000 gold coins have been successfully deducted. Ding. The designs are being drafted. The estimated time is 5 minutes. Host, please make the final confirmation. Do you want to add other clothing items? The system's cheerful voice sounded. Then it's settled. 800 sets of women's clothing designs, 150 sets of children's clothing designs, and 50 sets of children's clothing designs. Meg said after thinking for a while. In the end, he said with a meaty face, System, you directly deducted 10,000 gold coins from me and gave me 100 sets of women's clothing designs. This kind of thing is too easy for a high-level system like you. This request shouldn't be too much, right? We should give them some benefits. Ding. Order confirmed. 150 sets of women's clothing designs are being drafted. The order is free. The system's voice sounded. Very good. A smile appeared on Meg's face. He ignored the system and continued to look at Gloria, waiting for her reply. Gloria looked at Meg with her mouth slightly open. She thought she had been rejected by Meg. She didn't expect him to throw out an even bigger surprise in the blink of an eye. He was actually willing to design a batch of clothes for her. But what did he mean by sincerity? If it was about expenses, Mars had already made a plan before coming here. But if it wasn't about money, could it be that Mr. Meg wants me to do something for him? After all, I haven't seen his wife for so long. Gloria's face flashed with a hint of red. She tried her best to get rid of the strange thoughts in her head. She looked at Meg and stuttered a little. Mr. Meg, thank you very much for your trust. If you are willing to draw the designs for us, we are willing to pay you 100 gold coins for each design. Gloria paused for a moment and continued with a little embarrassment, but because the Suede doesn't have much cash on hand right now, we can only pay for 5 designs at most. Host, I want to increase the price. What you said is not the market price. What you are doing is cheating. The system roared in Meg's mind. System, our deal has already been confirmed. If you go back on your word now, it will seriously affect my evaluation of your credibility. Honesty is the most basic quality of a merchant. Plus, this is the price she offered. I haven't accepted it yet. Meg said with a calm expression. The price of 100 gold coins was enough to see Gloria's sincerity. She was willing to gamble with the last of her money for a fabric shop that was on the brink of bankruptcy. It was also enough to see the decisiveness of this beautiful girl. She had a keen sense for business opportunities and a decisive way of doing things. These were all qualities that a good merchant should have. Meg's impression of Gloria had been completely refreshed by her. At the same time, a plan appeared in his mind. He looked at Gloria's sincere and nervous eyes and shook his head. 100 gold coins is indeed a good price, but I want to change the way we work together. Change the way we work together? Gloria looked at Meg in confusion. I can give you the blueprints first. You don't have to pay me. After you make the clothes and sell them, I want 20% of the net profit. Meg smiled. 20% of the net profit. Gloria furrowed her brows in thought. Before coming to Mars, the highest price she had ever heard of was 150 gold coins per blueprint. She had never heard of a partnership where the blueprints were split. But Mr. Meg, if we don't sell many of the clothes we make, the Suede fabric shop will most likely close down in a month. You won't be able to get much of a reward then. Gloria was a little worried. Even though she was quite confident in her idea, this was still a completely new idea. She didn't want Meg to take this risk with her. I believe in Miss Gloria's ability. I also believe that this business model will become the trend of the clothing industry in the future. Meg shook his head and said calmly, besides, a business without risk isn't worth investing in. Gloria looked into Meg's eyes. She could feel the trust and encouragement in his eyes. Her conflicted heart became firm again. She nodded solemnly and said, all right, I accept your proposal. 20% of the net profit of every piece of clothing sold in Suede will belong to Mr. Meg. Also, I have a request and a suggestion. Meg said. Go ahead. Gloria nodded slightly. If Miss Gloria becomes the head of Family Morton in the future and controls the Aden Chamber of Commerce, I hope you can abolish all the discrimination against half-breeds in the Aden Chamber of Commerce. This is my request, Meg said with a serious expression. Gloria looked at Meg, and her eyes gradually lit up. She knew why Meg wanted this. This was a fatherly love that was even deeper than a hug. She was a little envious and touched. Without any hesitation, she nodded seriously and said, I promise, if I become the head of the Aden Chamber of Commerce in the future, I will abolish all the discrimination against half-breeds. Meg looked into Gloria's eyes for a while, and a smile reappeared on his face as he continued, my suggestion is that before you release your clothes, the Suede Textiles shop will be independent from Family Morton. If you want to become the sole heir to Family Morton, this will be the only business you can rely on. With this clothing shop that combines both manufacturing and sales, even if you can't become the heir to Family Morton, you will still be able to become a renowned businesswoman in Chaos City. Gloria's eyes lit up even more. She stood up and bowed to Meg. Thank you. I'll get them to speed up the process when I get back. We'll be waiting for your blueprints. There's no need to wait. I just happen to have 3 blueprints for autumn outfits. Let's make autumn outfits before autumn passes. Meg made his way over to the counter and pulled out 3 blueprints for dresses from a large stack before handing them over to the surprised Gloria. Meg shrugged with a smile and said, "There's no need to be too surprised. Designing clothes is a hobby of mine, and I'm sure all professional tailors will be able to read these blueprints. I want all of the clothes I design to be respected, and the same goes for all of my customers." Gloria nodded with a serious expression and said, "I'll find the best tailors and get them to make the best clothes. Your designs definitely won't go to waste." Meg contemplated momentarily before offering, "I know a friend who's very adept at embroidery. If you need her help, I can recommend her to work in your shop. Perhaps she'll be able to provide you with a lot of help. One of these 3 outfits requires some embroidery skills." "That's great. I hope Mr. Meg can recommend her to our suede textiles shop." Gloria's eyes lit up. "I still have to ask her for her opinion." Meg nodded with a smile. He stood up, extended his right hand toward Gloria, and smiled as he said, "Then I look forward to working with you." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.